I think it's time for you to move out.
Move? Why?
It's just not working anymore.
I don't understand. I have every intention of living my life here. He's just leaving now.
This is Cecil.
Yes, everything is ready. Call me back when he's gone.
Mom.
Welcome home, dear. I think we need to talk.
My son slid 3 glossy senior living brochures across my kitchen table and said, "Mom, I think it's time you moved out." For a moment I thought I'd misunderstood him. I was 68 years old, sitting in the house my husband and I had bought, paid off, and raised our family in. Yet Ethan spoke as if my leaving had already been decided. Rachel stood by the counter without looking at me. I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I simply folded the brochures, looked at my son, and asked, "What time do you leave for work tomorrow?" A relief crossed his face. He thought I had surrendered. The next morning I watched his car disappear down the street, picked up my phone and made the call that would change everything. Before I tell you what happened next, tell me honestly in the comments, what would you do if your own child asked you to leave a home that belonged to you? And if stories about family betrayal and finding the courage to stand up for yourself speak to you, please like and subscribe. I'd also love to know where you're watching from and what time it is there. Sometimes it amazes me how far a story can travel. 2 years before my son told me it was time to leave my own house, I would have laughed if anyone had suggested we would ever end up on opposite sides of a kitchen table. Back then, Ethan was still the person I trusted most in the world. My husband, Thomas, had been gone for a little over a year, and I was still learning how to live inside the silence he left behind. Thomas and I had bought our colonial house in Richmond, Virginia, more than 30 years earlier. When we first moved in, the upstairs bathroom leaked, the kitchen cabinets were an awful shade of brown, and the backyard was mostly weeds. We couldn't afford contractors for every little problem, so we learned to fix things ourselves. Thomas replaced drywall. I painted walls. We planted a dogwood tree near the back porch. We raised Ethan there. Every doorway seemed to hold a memory. After Thomas died, those memories became both a comfort and a burden. I would wake up and still expect to hear him downstairs making coffee. Sometimes I'd walk into the living room and glance toward his chair before remembering there would never be a newspaper folded across his lap again. People kept telling me I should sell. "You don't need all that space, Nicole." But I wasn't ready. The house wasn't too large then. It was simply too quiet. That was why when Ethan called me one rainy Tuesday evening, I answered before the second ring. "Hey, sweetheart. Hey, Mom." Something in his voice immediately bothered me. Ethan was 40 then, and he had always hated admitting when something wasn't going well. Even as a boy, he would hide a bad report card under his mattress rather than bring it downstairs. "What happened?" I asked. There was a pause. Nothing happened exactly. That meant something had definitely happened. I explained that the rent on the house he and Rachel were leasing had gone up again. His commission income at the medical equipment company had been inconsistent, and an investment he'd made with a former coworker hadn't worked out the way he'd expected. He didn't tell me how much he'd lost. I didn't ask. At least not then. "We're not broke," he said quickly. "I don't want you thinking that. I didn't say you were. We just need some breathing room." I knew where the conversation was heading before he said it. Still hearing the words made something inside me soften. "Could we stay with you for a little while?" He rushed through the rest. Just until they rebuilt their savings. Just until they figured out their next move. Just until things settled down. 6 months, Mom. Maybe less. I looked around my kitchen. Thomas's coffee mug was still sitting on the shelf above the sink. I hadn't used it since he died, but I couldn't bring myself to put it away. I imagined Ethan at the table again. Rachel cooking beside me. Maya doing homework upstairs. Noise. Doors opening. Someone calling my name from another room. Family. "When would you need to come?" I asked. There was another pause, but this one sounded different. Relief. "Maybe next weekend." That should have told me they had already been discussing it before Ethan called. But I didn't think about that. I said yes. The following Saturday, a rental truck pulled into my driveway. Maya jumped out of the passenger side before Ethan had even shut off the engine. She was 14 then, all long legs and braids, and she ran straight toward me. "Grandma?" She wrapped both arms around me. I hadn't realized how badly I needed that hug until I felt it. Rachel came over next. "Nicole, thank you," she said. "Seriously, you have no idea how much this helps." She looked exhausted, and whatever reservations I had disappeared. "Your family," I told her. "You don't have to thank me." Ethan was unloading boxes. He smiled when he saw me watching him. 6 months, he reminded me. I smiled back. "I'm not starting a stopwatch." It sounded like a joke. Later, I would remember those words more than once. The first few weeks were wonderful. I mean that sincerely. I don't want to rewrite the past just because I know how the story ended. There was laughter in my house again. Maya would come downstairs in the morning wearing mismatched socks and sit at the kitchen island while I made pancakes. Rachel and I divided the cooking without ever formally discussing it. She made wonderful chicken piccata. I made the pot roast Ethan had loved since childhood. For the first time since Thomas died, I was cooking for more than one person. That mattered more than I expected. Ethan helped around the house too. He repaired the dripping faucet in the guest bathroom. He adjusted the garage door when it started sticking. One Saturday afternoon, I found him in the backyard, trimming branches away from the fence. "You don't have to do all this," I told him. He wiped sweat from his forehead. "I'm living here rent-free, least I can do." At the time, I was proud to hear him say that. It sounded responsible. It sounded like the man Thomas and I had tried to raise. One evening, about a month after they moved in, all four of us were sitting around the dinner table. Maya was telling us about a teacher who had accidentally called her by another student's name 3 times in one class. Ethan was laughing. Rachel was laughing. And I remember looking around that table thinking, maybe this is what I needed. Maybe something good had come out of something difficult. After dinner, Ethan stayed behind while Rachel and Maya went upstairs. "You doing okay, Mom?" he asked. I knew he meant Thomas. "Some days." He nodded. Then he reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "You don't have to be alone anymore." Those words stayed with me. For months, whenever the house felt crowded, or I found someone's shoes in the hallway, or Rachel moved something in the kitchen and I couldn't find it, I remembered what Ethan had said. "You don't have to be alone anymore." So I adjusted. That was what mothers did, wasn't it? At least that was what I had always done. 3 months passed, then 4, then 5. I didn't ask about their plans. I assumed Ethan would tell me when he was ready. At the beginning of the 6th month, I noticed something. The apartment listings Ethan used to browse on his laptop disappeared. There were no conversations about neighborhoods, no weekend house tours, no discussions about deposits, nothing. One Saturday morning, Ethan was drinking coffee at the kitchen table while I sorted the mail. I tried to make my question sound casual. "Have you and Rachel found any places you like?" He looked up. "Places to move." Something flickered across his expression. Not anger, not yet. More like surprise that I'd brought it up. "Oh, not really." I waited. He took another sip of coffee. "The market's terrible right now, Mom. We'd be stupid to rush." "I thought you said 6 months." "I said around 6 months." I remembered the conversation clearly. 6 months, maybe less. But correcting him seemed petty. "So what's the new plan?" He leaned back in his chair. "Just give us a little more time. How much I don't know." "A few months?" He smiled. "It's working out okay, isn't it?" That question caught me off guard. Because technically, yes. Nothing terrible had happened. They weren't mistreating me. They weren't destroying the house. Maya was happy. And if I insisted they leave exactly at 6 months, what would that make me? A mother who valued a deadline more than her son's stability. I heard Thomas's voice in my head. He had always been better at boundaries than I was. "Nicole," he'd say, "a favor without an ending can become an expectation." But Thomas wasn't there. And Ethan was. So I nodded. "A few more months." He stood, kissed my cheek, and said, "You're the best mom." That should have been the moment when we sat down and made a real plan. A date, a budget, something concrete. Instead, I let love substitute for clarity. Another 3 months passed. Then Christmas came. Rachel bought new stockings and hung them across my fireplace. She placed hers beside Ethan's, then Maya's, then mine. I remember staring at those 4 stockings and feeling strangely reassured. We looked like one household. By spring, their boxes were no longer stacked in the guest rooms. Everything had been unpacked. Rachel's cookware filled half the kitchen cabinets. Ethan's suits occupied the closet in Thomas's old office. Maya had posters on her bedroom walls. Their family photographs appeared on the bookshelves. Their temporary life had quietly developed roots. And somewhere along the way, I stopped hearing the phrase 6 months. A full year passed. On the anniversary of the day they moved in, I noticed it only because a photograph appeared in my phone memories. There was Ethan beside the rental truck smiling. Maya was making a silly face behind him. I stared at that photograph for a long time. 1 year. That evening, I almost said something. Ethan was in the living room watching television. Rachel was upstairs. Maya was studying. I stood in the doorway. Ethan. Yeah. For some reason, the words wouldn't come. Maybe I didn't want to sound ungrateful for their company. Maybe I didn't want the house to become quiet again. Maybe I was afraid that asking my son to make plans would sound like asking him to leave my life. So instead I said, "Do you want some tea?" "Sure." I went back to the kitchen and made 2 cups. Looking back, I understand something I couldn't see then. Ethan didn't take over my home in one dramatic moment. There was no argument, no demand, no slammed door. It happened through extensions, a few more weeks, a few more months, one more holiday, one more reason why now wasn't the right time. And every time I said yes, the previous yes became easier for him to forget. By the end of that first year, Ethan no longer talked like someone staying in his mother's house temporarily. He talked about repairs we should make, furniture we should replace, things we should change. At first I found that comforting. Until one Sunday afternoon I came home from lunch with a friend and stopped in the doorway of my living room. Thomas's leather chair was gone. It had sat beside the fireplace for 23 years. In its place was a pale upholstered chair I had never seen before. For several seconds I simply stood there holding my purse. Then Rachel walked in from the kitchen. "Oh, good," she said brightly. "You're home." I pointed toward the empty space beside the fireplace. "Where's Thomas's chair?" Her smile faltered. Ethan moved it to the garage. I looked at the new chair. Why? Rachel hesitated. Then she gave me a gentle smile as if she were about to explain something I should already understand. "We just thought it was time to freshen things up a little." And for the first time since they had moved into my house, I felt something I had never expected to feel under my own roof. I felt like I was the guest. I stood in the living room staring at the pale upholstered chair where Thomas's old leather recliner had been. For 23 years, that corner had belonged to him. Every evening after dinner, Thomas would lower himself into that chair with the Richmond Times-Dispatch folded under one arm and his reading glasses tucked into his shirt pocket. On Sunday afternoons, he sometimes fell asleep there, with a baseball game playing softly on television. After he died, I rarely sat in it, but I liked seeing it. It reminded me that Thomas had been real, that our marriage had been real, that the life we'd built hadn't simply disappeared because one person was gone. "Where exactly did Ethan put it?" I asked. "In the garage," Rachel said. I walked past her. "Nicole, wait." I opened the garage door. Thomas's chair was pushed against the far wall between several storage boxes. An old blanket had been thrown over it. I pulled the blanket away. There it was. I ran my fingers over the worn leather on one armrest. Thomas had a habit of tapping his fingers there whenever he was thinking. I could almost see his hand. Rachel appeared behind me. "I didn't realize you'd be upset. You could have asked. We were trying to surprise you." I turned around. By removing my husband's chair. Her expression changed immediately. "I didn't mean it like that." Rachel was good at making disagreements sound like misunderstanding. She stepped closer. "I just thought the living room could feel brighter. You've had the same furniture forever. That chair stays." "Okay," she said it quickly. "No problem." Ethan brought it back inside that evening. He didn't apologize. He simply carried it through the doorway and said, "There. Crisis solved." Crisis. The word bothered me, but I let it go. The chair returned. Other things didn't. A week later, I noticed the framed photograph of Thomas and me from our 25th anniversary was missing from the console table. I found it in a drawer. 2 photographs of Ethan, Rachel, and Maya had replaced it. I put mine back. Several days later, Rachel moved it to a bookshelf. Nothing she did was dramatic enough to justify a confrontation. That was what made it so difficult. If someone walks into your home and announces, "I'm taking over," you know exactly what you're dealing with. But when changes arrive, disguised as helpful suggestions, you begin questioning whether you're being unreasonable. Rachel changed the curtains in the dining room. She replaced the runner on the kitchen table. She reorganized my pantry because she said the old system was inefficient. One afternoon, I opened a cabinet looking for the casserole dish my mother had given me and couldn't find it. Rachel. She was working on her laptop at the island. "Have you seen my blue casserole dish? The chipped one. It has a small chip. I put it in a donation box." I stared at her. "You what?" She immediately closed her laptop. "I haven't donated anything yet. It's in the garage. Why would you put my dishes in a donation box?" She looked embarrassed. "I was clearing out duplicates. They're not duplicates if they belong to me." "I know, you're right." Again an apology. Again a misunderstanding. Again I felt guilty for being angry. That evening, Ethan found me bringing the casserole dish back inside. "You and Rachel okay? She keeps moving my things." He sighed. "She's just trying to help." I didn't ask for help. "Mom, don't make this bigger than it is." There it was again. The subtle suggestion that my reaction was the problem. I looked at him. "If someone came into your home and started deciding which of your belongings should be donated, would you appreciate it?" He smiled as though the comparison were ridiculous. "She's not someone, she's family, so am I." His smile disappeared. For a moment neither of us spoke. Then he kissed my forehead. "Just tell her what you want left alone." I almost laughed. Everything I wanted to say. "Leave everything alone unless you ask me first." Instead, I nodded. I kept trying to preserve peace. The biggest change came several months later. Thomas's old office was at the front of the house. After he died, I'd left it mostly untouched. His drafting pencils were still in a ceramic mug on the desk. A framed photograph of Ethan at his college graduation sat beside the lamp. One Saturday, I heard furniture moving. When I walked down the hallway, Ethan was dragging Thomas's desk toward the door. "What are you doing?" He stopped. "Making some room." "For what, my office?" I looked past him. Several boxes were already packed. Thomas's books, his old calculator, folders from his years as a construction estimator. "You packed his things, Mom. They've been sitting here for almost 3 years. So nobody uses this room." "I do." Ethan looked genuinely surprised. "For what?" That question hurt more than it should have. I didn't have an answer that would make sense to him. Sometimes I sat there. Sometimes I opened the blinds. Sometimes I touched Thomas's drafting ruler. Sometimes being surrounded by the ordinary objects of our marriage made grief feel less enormous. "I use it," I repeated. Ethan rubbed the back of his neck. "I need somewhere quiet for work. I'm taking more calls from home now. You have the guest room. Rachel uses that when she's working." I looked at the boxes again. "Did you think about asking me?" He exhaled. "Mom, I'm asking now." "No, you're telling me now." He stared at me. Then Maya appeared at the top of the stairs. "Dad," the tension immediately changed. Ethan lowered his voice. "We'll talk later." But we never did. Within 2 days, Thomas's office became Ethan's office. I told myself it was practical. That was becoming my favorite excuse. Practical, temporary, family. Those 3 words could justify almost anything. Then Ethan offered to take over the utility bills. "You shouldn't have to deal with all these websites," he said one morning. "I've paid bills online for years." "I know. I'm just trying to make things easier." He had already created an account for the electric company. "I can set everything to autopay." I hesitated. I'd spent 32 years working in payroll. Numbers didn't intimidate me, but Ethan seemed so eager to help. so I allowed him to manage the electricity, water, internet, and gas accounts. The payments still came from my household checking account. At first, nothing seemed wrong. Then one afternoon, I tried to log into the internet account because the bill looked higher than usual. My password didn't work. I reset it. When I opened the account profile, Ethan's email address was listed as the primary contact. I checked the electric account. Same thing. His phone number, his email, my payment information. I walked into his office. He was wearing a headset. I waited until his call ended. "Why is your email on my utility accounts?" He barely looked up. "Because I'm managing them. You didn't need to remove mine. I didn't remove it. You're probably secondary. They're my accounts." He pushed his chair back. "Mom, do you want me to handle this stuff or not?" Something in his tone made me pause. It wasn't the question. It was the irritation. As if I were interfering with something he'd already been given authority over. "I want access to anything being paid with my money." "Fine." He turned back to his computer. "I'll fix it." I stood there another second. "Today, please." He looked over his shoulder. "Sure." That evening my email was restored. But the feeling didn't go away. I began paying closer attention. I noticed Ethan referred to the backyard as our yard when talking to a landscaping company. Rachel told a friend she wanted to repaint our kitchen. Mail addressed to Ethan and Rachel arrived every day, packages stacked beside the front door. Their cars occupied the driveway, while mine increasingly sat inside the garage. Each individual thing was harmless. Together they formed something I couldn't yet name. One evening I went upstairs early with a headache. Around 9 I came back down for water. As I approached the kitchen, I heard Rachel and Ethan talking. They couldn't see me from the hallway. Rachel was showing him something on her laptop. "If we opened this wall," she said, "you'd get a direct sightline into the dining room." Ethan laughed. "That would cost a fortune." "Not necessarily. We'd still have to redo the floors. Eventually." There was a pause. Then Rachel said the sentence that changed the way I heard everything afterward. "When this place is finally ours, we won't have to do it all at once." I stopped walking. For a moment I thought I'd heard her wrong. Finally ours. Ethan didn't correct her. Instead, he said something too quietly for me to hear. I stepped into the kitchen. Rachel looked up. Her expression changed instantly. "Oh, Nicole. What are you two looking at?" She closed the laptop halfway. "Nothing important." Ethan reached for his coffee. "Rachel's just playing around with renovation ideas." "For this house," Rachel smiled. "You know me. Occupational hazard." I looked from her to Ethan. Neither seemed particularly uncomfortable. Maybe that was what unsettled me most. I filled my glass. As I turned to leave, Rachel said, "You okay?" "Fine." I carried the water upstairs. But instead of going to bed, I sat on the edge of my mattress in the dark. I repeated the sentence in my mind. "When this place is finally ours." There were innocent explanations. Maybe Rachel meant years from now. Maybe she assumed Ethan would inherit the house eventually. Maybe it was nothing more than careless language. But inheritance requires something nobody likes to mention. The current owner has to die, or leave. I looked around my bedroom. My house. For the first time, those words felt important. The next morning, I found Rachel making coffee. She smiled normally. "Morning, morning." I almost asked her what she'd meant. Instead, I watched her take a mug from the cabinet she'd reorganized. Then Ethan came downstairs, already talking into his phone, and walked straight into the office that used to belong to his father. I said nothing. But something had changed. Until then, I had been trying to understand how to share my home with my family. Now a different question had entered my mind. Were they sharing my home with me? Or were they simply waiting for it to become theirs? That afternoon, while everyone was out, I walked through every room slowly. The dining room, the living room, Thomas's former office, the upstairs bedrooms, the kitchen. I noticed how much had changed in less than 2 years. Then I went to the small desk in my bedroom and opened the bottom drawer. Inside was an old notebook. I placed it on the desk. I wasn't ready to accuse anyone of anything. But after spending 32 years processing payroll, I'd learned one lesson that never failed me. When something doesn't add up, you don't ignore the feeling. You start keeping records. The first thing I wrote in that notebook was Rachel's sentence, "When this place is finally ours." I wrote the date underneath it as closely as I could remember, then closed the cover and slipped the notebook into the bottom drawer of my bedroom desk. At the time, I felt almost foolish. I wasn't investigating a crime. These were my children, my family. But I'd spent 32 years working in payroll, and one thing that job taught me was that memory becomes unreliable the moment emotions enter a disagreement. So I started writing things down. Not everything, only the moments that left me feeling as though the ground beneath my own feet had shifted. For a few weeks, nothing happened. Then Ethan began talking about the stairs. It started one morning when I came down carrying a laundry basket. I was standing in the hallway tying his shoes. "Mom, you shouldn't be doing that." "Doing what?" "Carrying laundry down the stairs." I looked at the basket. "I've been carrying laundry down these stairs since you were in elementary school." "Exactly." I waited. He smiled. "You're not 40 anymore. I was 68. I walked 3 mornings a week with my friend Carol. I drove myself everywhere. I handled my own finances, appointments, groceries, medications, yard service, and home maintenance. But suddenly, in Ethan's version of my life, a laundry basket had become evidence. "I think I can manage." "I know you can." He took the basket anyway. "I'm just saying you need to be careful." That sounded reasonable. Everything always sounded reasonable at first. A few days later, Rachel sent me a link. The text reads, "Saw this and thought of you. So pretty." I opened it. It wasn't a restaurant or a blouse. It was a senior living community outside Richmond. The website showed smiling gray-haired couples drinking wine beside a fireplace. There was a fitness center, walking paths, organized activities, and one-level apartments. I stared at my phone. Rachel walked into the kitchen 10 minutes later. "Did you see what I sent?" "Yes." "Isn't it beautiful? It looks nice." "They have everything there. Yoga, book clubs, transportation. I have a car." "I know." She opened the refrigerator. "I just thought you'd like seeing what's out there." Why, Rachel turned. "For the future." "What future?" She laughed softly. "Oh, Nicole. Nothing specific. Everybody should know their options." I nodded. But that evening, I added another entry to the notebook. Rachel sent senior living link. 2 weeks later, she sent another. Then Ethan mentioned a condominium development with elevators. Then Rachel told me about a client whose 71-year-old mother had moved into a retirement community and absolutely loved not having to maintain a house anymore. None of these conversations were aggressive. That was what made them so effective. They were droplets, one by one, a suggestion here, a concern there. Until I started noticing they all flowed in the same direction, out the front door. One Sunday afternoon, Ethan found me trimming dead roses in the backyard. "You know," he said, "this yard is getting to be a lot." I straightened. "For whom?" "For you. I have a landscaper. That's money you wouldn't have to spend somewhere smaller." I looked at him. "Are you worried about my money?" He hesitated. "No. I'm worried about you. I'm fine. I know you're fine now." There it was. Now. As if decline were standing somewhere around the corner, waiting for permission to enter. He picked up a fallen branch. "You ever think about downsizing?" I rested my gardening shears on the edge of the flower bed. "Why do you keep asking me that? I don't keep asking. You and Rachel mention it fairly often." His expression tightened. "We're trying to help you plan. I already have plans. What plans to live here?" He laughed. Not cruelly. That almost made it worse. "Forever, as long as I want." He stared at me for a moment. Then he shrugged. "Okay, Mom." He walked back toward the house. I stayed beside the roses. That evening I wrote down the conversation. The notebook was beginning to fill. Still, I kept telling myself I was overreacting. Then came the dinner. It was a Thursday. Rachel had made salmon, and Maya was complaining about a chemistry test. The conversation moved from school to a neighbor's renovation, and then somehow to the upstairs bathroom. Rachel mentioned that the plumbing needed updating. Ethan said if they were going to renovate anything, they should eventually do the master bathroom first. I looked up. Why the master bathroom? He cut another piece of salmon. It's ancient. It works. Rachel smiled. He means someday. Ethan nodded. Yeah, someday. Then he added casually, honestly, that whole master suite would work better for us anyway, if we ever had the whole place. Silence. Not complete silence. The refrigerator was humming. A car passed outside. But nobody at that table spoke. Maya looked at her father. Dad. What? That sounded weird. Ethan frowned. What sounded weird? You just talked about Grandma's room like you're getting it. Rachel immediately intervened. That's not what he meant. Maya looked at me. I kept my face still. Ethan gave an awkward laugh. Come on, we're talking hypothetically. Hypothetically, when Maya asked. Rachel warned. What? She looked genuinely confused. Grandma lives here. Ethan put down his fork. Nobody said she doesn't. I finally spoke. So explain what you meant. Ethan looked at me. For the first time he seemed uncomfortable. I meant if you ever decided to downsize. I haven't. I know. Then why are you planning what you'd do with my bedroom? I'm not planning anything. Rachel reached for her water. We were just talking about renovations. I turned to her. Renovations to my bedroom. Eventually. That word again. Eventually. I looked around the table. Something inside me felt terribly clear. They weren't simply discussing possibilities. They had imagined a version of this house without me in it. Perhaps not tomorrow. Perhaps not next month. But someday. And in that version they weren't leaving. I was. Maya pushed food around her plate. Grandma's not old. I smiled at her. Thank you, sweetheart. Ethan sighed. Nobody said she's old. You keep sending her retirement places. Rachel froze. I looked at Maya. You know about that? She shrugged. Mom showed Dad one last week. My eyes moved toward Rachel. You were looking at them together. Rachel placed her fork down carefully. We saw one that looked nice. So these aren't random things you happen to find, Nicole. You're making this sound sinister. I didn't use that word. Ethan leaned forward. Can we stop? Nobody spoke. Then he looked at me. We're concerned about you, that's all. Concerned about what the future. Whose future? His jaw tightened. Yours. I almost asked him whether he was sure. Instead, I finished dinner. Afterward, I washed my plate and went upstairs. I didn't cry. That surprised me. I had cried over smaller things since Thomas died. A shirt of his. A song in the grocery store. The first Christmas without him. But that night, I wasn't sad enough to cry. I was angry. Quietly angry. I opened my notebook. I wrote every sentence I could remember. Especially Ethan's. That whole master suite would work better for us anyway, if we ever had the whole place. Then I added what Maya had revealed. Rachel and Ethan had been looking at senior communities together. I stared at the page. For the first time, the pattern was visible. They weren't reacting to changes in my health. There hadn't been any. They weren't responding to a financial crisis. I didn't have one. They were introducing the idea of my leaving before there was any reason for me to leave. Why I closed the notebook. The next morning I changed something. Not in the house. In myself. I stopped automatically explaining my decisions. When Rachel suggested another senior community, I said, I'm not interested. No excuse. When Ethan said I should let him handle my property tax payment, I said I have it covered. When Rachel asked if she could clear more boxes from Thomas's things, I said no. She looked surprised. None. But some of this stuff hasn't been touched in years. It belongs to me. She nodded slowly. Okay. The more I said no, the more I noticed something. They didn't like it. Ethan became impatient. Rachel became unusually polite. The atmosphere in the house shifted. For almost 2 years, my flexibility had been treated as normal. The moment I created boundaries, those boundaries felt like hostility to them. One afternoon, Ethan came into the kitchen while I was paying bills. You've been different lately. I looked up. How, I don't know. Defensive. About what, everything. I closed my checkbook. Maybe I'm just making more of my own decisions. He stared at me. You've always made your own decisions. I thought about Thomas's chair, his office, the utility accounts, the senior living brochures, my bedroom being discussed over dinner. Yes, I said quietly. I'd like to keep it that way. Ethan shook his head. Whatever that means. He walked away. That evening I sat at my desk again, but this time I didn't reach for the notebook. I looked at the old filing cabinet beside it. Thomas had organized our important documents there for decades: insurance, tax returns, property records, estate documents. After he died, I'd gone through most of them with our attorney. But it had been years since I'd looked closely. Suddenly, I wanted to see everything again. Not because I thought Ethan could simply take my house. I wasn't that naive. But because I'd realized something important. My son and his wife had been discussing my future. Maybe it was time I understood exactly what they believed that future contained. The next morning, everyone left early. Maya had school. Rachel had a staging appointment. Ethan drove to his office. At 9:15, the house became silent. I carried my coffee upstairs, then I unlocked the filing cabinet. The first folder I pulled out had one word written across the tab in Thomas's careful handwriting: property. Inside were the documents for the house. I sat down. For the next hour, I read every page. And near the bottom of that folder, underneath papers I hadn't touched in years, I found something I knew immediately did not belong there. A photocopy of the county property assessment. Someone had circled the estimated value of my house in blue ink. Below it were several handwritten calculations. I recognized the handwriting, Ethan's, and beside the final number he had written two words: after Mom. I read them once, then again, and suddenly, every conversation about my future sounded different. I sat at my desk with the property assessment in both hands and stared at those two words until they stopped looking like ordinary handwriting. After Mom. There was nothing complicated about them. No legal language, no explanation. Just two words written beside a number representing the estimated value of my home. Ethan's handwriting had always leaned slightly to the right. Even as a boy, his capital letters were too large for the lines on the page. I knew that handwriting. I knew my son. Or at least I thought I did. For a few seconds I tried to invent an innocent explanation. Maybe Ethan had been helping me organize something. Maybe he'd looked up the property value because of taxes. Maybe after Mom meant after I moved. But that explanation didn't make me feel better. I looked at the calculations. The county's assessed value had been circled. Underneath, Ethan had written another number, apparently an estimate of the house's market value. Then he'd subtracted what looked like projected selling costs. There was no mortgage balance because the mortgage had been paid off years ago. At the bottom was a figure large enough to make my stomach tighten. And beside it, after Mom. This wasn't a random note. It was a calculation. I placed the paper on the desk and forced myself to breathe slowly. Then I did what I had always done when something involving money made me uncomfortable. I checked the documents. The deed was first. Nicole Harper. My name. Thomas's name had once appeared beside mine, but after his death the ownership records had been properly updated according to the way we'd held title. I was the legal owner. I checked the mortgage satisfaction document, paid in full. Thomas and I had made the final payment 6 years before he died. I remembered that day. He had come home with a cheap bottle of champagne and a bakery cake with the words, "Free and Clear," written across the top in blue icing. I'd laughed until I cried. "You realize nobody celebrates mortgages with cake," I'd told him. "We do." He had raised his glass, to never owing anybody for the roof over our heads again. That memory hit differently now. I touched the edge of the document. Thomas had been proud of this house. Not because it was grand. It wasn't. It was a comfortable 4-bedroom colonial in an older Richmond neighborhood where people waved from their porches and complained together when property taxes increased. But we'd earned it. Every room represented years of work. Thomas had spent decades estimating construction projects. I'd spent 32 years processing payroll for a construction company, checking numbers until my eyes blurred and fixing mistakes before Friday paychecks went out. There had been years when we couldn't afford vacations. Years when the water heater failed the same month Ethan needed braces. Years when we ate leftovers 3 nights in a row because an unexpected bill had arrived. Nobody had handed us that house. And now my son had written its value on a piece of paper as though it were a future deposit waiting to clear. I continued through the folder. Property tax receipts, homeowner's insurance, renovation invoices, then the estate documents. Thomas and I had updated our wills several times over the years. Nothing about them seemed unusual. Everything was exactly where it should be. There was no document transferring ownership to Ethan, no life estate, no agreement promising him the property, no paperwork giving him authority over it. I knew that already. But seeing the documents settled something inside me. The house was mine, not emotionally, not symbolically, legally, mine. I leaned back in the chair. Then I heard Thomas's voice in my memory. Know what you own, Nicole. He used to say that whenever friends signed financial papers without reading them. Thomas wasn't suspicious by nature. He was careful. There was a difference. Know what you own, he'd say. Know what you owe, and never be embarrassed to ask questions. At the time, I used to tease him. You sound like a bank commercial. Maybe the bank should hire me. I smiled at the memory. Then I looked at Ethan's paper again, and the smile disappeared. I wondered when he'd put it there. That question bothered me almost as much as the words themselves. Had he slipped it into the folder recently? Had he been going through my documents while I was out? Did he know exactly where I kept the deed? I checked the filing cabinet lock. It wasn't damaged, but the key had hung in the small desk organizer for years. Anyone in the family could have found it. I picked up the assessment. There was a printed date near the bottom. 8 months earlier. 8 months. That meant Ethan had been thinking about the house long before the dinner conversation about my bedroom, long before some of the senior living suggestions. I reached for my notebook. Property assessment found in property folder. I wrote the date printed on the document. Then Ethan calculated estimated equity. Then I stopped. Writing the final 2 words felt strange. Still I wrote them. After Mom. I closed the notebook. For the rest of that morning, I moved through the house differently. Every room seemed to contain 2 versions of reality. There was the reality I had believed. My son had needed help. I had opened my home. His family had stayed longer than planned. We were making adjustments. Then there was another possible reality. Ethan had begun seeing my house as part of his financial future. Once that possibility existed, I couldn't stop noticing things. The renovations Rachel discussed, the master bedroom comment, the questions about downsizing, the senior communities. Even Ethan's offer to manage household accounts felt different. I hated myself for thinking that way. This was my child. I remembered holding him when he had chickenpox. I remembered sitting beside his hospital bed when he broke his arm at 11. I remembered driving 4 hours to his college because his first serious girlfriend had broken up with him and he'd called me pretending he was fine. Mothers accumulate thousands of memories that argue against believing the worst about their children. That afternoon, Ethan came home early. I heard the garage door. My first instinct was to hide the property assessment. Then I stopped. Why should I feel guilty? Still, I didn't want a confrontation until I understood more. So I returned the paper to exactly where I'd found it. Same folder, same position. Then I locked the cabinet and put the key somewhere new, in the small jewelry box inside my closet. Ethan entered the kitchen while I was making tea. Hey, Mom. Hi. He opened the refrigerator. You eat lunch? Yes. He pulled out a bottle of water. For a moment, I simply watched him. He looked completely ordinary. My son, blue dress shirt, sleeves rolled up, tie loosened. How was work long? He drank some water. Then, almost as if the universe wanted to test me, he asked, You ever hear back about that property tax reassessment? My hand stopped over the teacup. What reassessment? The county. I didn't file one. Oh. He looked toward the refrigerator. I thought you mentioned something about taxes. No. Never mind. He started to leave. Ethan. He turned. Yes. Do you know what this house is worth? The question came out before I could stop it. His expression changed. Only slightly. Not really. You've never looked? He shrugged. Probably 700, maybe more. That answer came too quickly. I said nothing. He laughed. Why you thinking about selling? I watched him carefully. Would that bother you? The smile stayed on his face, but something behind it tightened. I mean, you'd tell us first, right? There it was. Not, are you thinking about moving? Not, why would you sell? Not, are you okay? You'd tell us first. Why? Because we live here, temporarily. The word landed between us. Ethan looked away. Mom, we've been here almost 2 years. I know. So it's not exactly temporary anymore. I felt something cold settle in my chest. That wasn't the original agreement. He sighed. Are we really doing this now? I'm asking a question. No, you're making a point. Maybe I am. He set the water bottle down. If you want us out, just say it. I studied his face. For one dangerous second, guilt rose inside me. The old instinct. Reassure him. Smooth it over. Tell him of course I didn't want him gone. Then I remembered the paper upstairs. After Mom. I didn't say that. Then what's going on? Nothing. He stared at me. You've been weird lately. Maybe I've been thinking. About what my future. The irony wasn't lost. He smiled, but there was no warmth in it. Well, that's what Rachel and I have been trying to get you to do. I almost laughed. Instead, I lifted my tea. My future and your version of my future may not be the same thing. His face hardened. Before he could respond, the front door opened. Maya called from the hallway. Grandma, in here. She entered carrying her backpack. Ethan picked up his water. We'll talk later. I watched him leave. That evening after everyone went to bed, I returned to my desk. I didn't open the filing cabinet. I opened my notebook. Underneath the entry about the property assessment, I asked Ethan if he knew the value. Estimated approximately $700,000 immediately. Then asked whether I was thinking of selling. Concerned whether I would tell them first. I put down my pen. It wasn't proof of anything sinister. I knew that. I wasn't going to turn every sentence into evidence against my own son. But I was no longer willing to ignore patterns simply because acknowledging them hurt. The next morning, Ethan caught me in the hallway. His mood had changed. He was cheerful again. Hey, Mom, quick question. I waited. Mortgage is completely paid off, right? I felt my entire body become still. Yes. He nodded. That's what I thought. Why are you asking? No reason. He smiled, just curious. Then he walked into Thomas's old office and closed the door. I stood there staring after him. A week earlier, I might have accepted that answer. Not anymore. Because once someone has calculated the value of your home and written, after Mom, beside the number, questions about mortgages stopped sounding casual, and I had a feeling Ethan's questions were only beginning. Ethan's questions did not stop with the mortgage. They became more specific. That was what frightened me. If he'd asked everything at once, I might have confronted him immediately. But Ethan was smarter than that, or perhaps he simply didn't realize how closely I had started listening. A question appeared every few days, casual, almost forgettable. One Saturday morning, I was making scrambled eggs when he came into the kitchen. Property taxes went up again, didn't they? A little. How much are you paying now? I turned from the stove. Why? He opened the refrigerator. Just curious. You've become very curious about my finances. He laughed. Mom, property taxes aren't exactly private information. No, but my reasons for paying them are. He looked at me for a second. Okay. Then he changed the subject. 3 days later, he asked about homeowners insurance. The following week, he asked whether I'd updated my will after Thomas died. That one stopped me. We were sitting on the back patio. Maya was at a friend's house. Rachel had gone to meet a client. Ethan and I had been talking about nothing important when he suddenly said, "Did you ever redo your will after Dad died?" I set down my iced tea. Yes. When? A while ago. Who handled it? I looked at him. Why do you need to know? He immediately softened his expression. I don't need to know. Then why ask because you're my mother? That doesn't answer the question. He leaned back. I'm trying to make sure everything's organized. Everything is organized. Okay. He lifted both hands. Forget I asked. That phrase became another pattern. Forget I asked. As if the question vanished because he withdrew it. But questions reveal what people are thinking about. And Ethan was thinking about my property, my will, my money, my future. I wrote each conversation in the notebook. I also made a change Ethan didn't know about. I moved all important documents out of the bedroom filing cabinet. Not because I believed he would steal them. I didn't know what I believed anymore. I simply didn't want anyone accessing them without my permission. I bought a small fireproof document box and placed it in the locked storage cabinet at my bank. The original deed insurance documents, estate papers, mortgage satisfaction letter, and several other records went inside. Copies remained at home. That small action gave me an unexpected sense of relief. For the first time in months, I felt like I had done something rather than merely reacted. Then Ethan made his biggest mistake. It happened on a Sunday afternoon. Rachel and Maya had gone shopping. I was in the dining room sorting photographs into albums when Ethan sat across from me. He watched me for a minute. That Dad? He pointed toward a photograph. Thomas was standing beside our old station wagon sometime in the late 80s, holding a toddler-sized Ethan on his shoulders. Yes. Ethan smiled. I remember that car. You hated that car. Because everybody else's parents had normal cars. That was a normal car. It had fake wood on the side. I laughed despite myself. For a few minutes, he was simply my son again. That made what came next even harder. He picked up another photograph. You know, I've been thinking. I kept sorting. That usually costs me money. He smiled. I'm serious. So am I. He placed the photograph down. With the house and everything, we should probably get some things simplified. My hand stopped. What things? Paperwork. What paperwork? Just stuff that could become complicated later. I waited. He rubbed his palms together. You know Mike Henderson from work? I don't think so. His mom had a stroke last year. I'm sorry. She's okay now mostly. But when it happened, nobody could access anything. Bank accounts, utilities, property stuff. It was a nightmare. I have arrangements. Sure, but arrangements can get outdated. I knew where this was heading. Still, I let him continue. He leaned forward. One thing Mike said they should have done was put his name on his mother's house earlier. There it was. I kept my voice calm. Why? Because then he could handle things. What things? Anything. Repairs. Insurance. If she needed to move. Whatever. I can handle those things. Right now. Those two words again. Right now. I looked directly at him. Ethan, what exactly are you suggesting? He hesitated. Then he said it. Maybe we should add my name to the deed. For a moment I heard nothing. Not the refrigerator. Not the traffic outside. Nothing. I thought about the property assessment. After Mom. The senior living communities. The questions about my will. The mortgage. The property taxes. Now the deed. I folded my hands on the table. Why would I do that? His eyebrows rose. For protection. Who's yours? How does giving you ownership of my house protect me? It wouldn't be like giving me the house. Putting your name on the deed gives you an ownership interest. He blinked. Maybe he had forgotten what I did for 32 years. Payroll wasn't real estate law, but I understood documents. I understood ownership. And I understood that signatures mattered. It's just estate planning, he said. No, it isn't. Mom, I already have an estate plan. Things change. My attorney can change them if necessary. He leaned back. So you'd rather involve some lawyer than your own son. The manipulation was so obvious that strangely it helped me. Months earlier, guilt might have worked. Now I recognized it. This isn't about who I trust emotionally. Sounds like it is. No, it's about ownership. He looked toward the window. I continued. This house belongs to me. There is no reason to add anyone else to the deed. What happens if you fall? I get up. I'm serious. So am I. What happens if you can't make decisions? My estate documents cover that. Have you even read them recently? Yes. That surprised him. I saw it. Only for a second. But I saw it. When? Recently enough. He became quiet. Then he asked, "Did you change something?" There was a sharpness in his voice. I tilted my head. "Why would that concern you?" "It doesn't." It sounded like it did. He pushed his chair back. "Forget it." There was that phrase again. He stood. "I was trying to help. I didn't ask for this kind of help." He stared down at me. "You know, Mom, someday I'm going to have to deal with all of this anyway. All of this." He gestured around the room. "The house, my belongings, my life." I felt the words before I fully understood them. "Someday," I said quietly, "is not today." His jaw tightened. "I know that. Then act like it." He walked away. No kiss on my forehead. No joking apology. He went into Thomas's old office and closed the door hard enough that I heard the frame shake. I remained at the dining table. My hands were trembling. Not from fear. From grief. There is a particular kind of heartbreak that comes when your child disappoints you as an adult. When they're young, you expect mistakes. You correct them, forgive them, teach them. But Ethan was 42 years old. I couldn't ground him. I couldn't take away his car keys. I couldn't tell him to go upstairs and think about what he'd done. All I could do was decide what I would allow. Rachel came home an hour later. By dinner, she clearly knew what had happened. She was overly polite. "Would you like more chicken, Nicole?" "No, thank you. Everything okay?" "Fine." Ethan barely spoke. Maya looked between us. After dinner, she followed me upstairs. "Grandma." "Yes, did Dad do something?" I smiled. "Why do you ask?" "He gets quiet when he's mad but pretends he's not." That sounded so much like Ethan as a teenager that I almost laughed. "We disagreed about something." "About me, no, sweetheart." She nodded, then hugged me. "Okay." I held her a little longer than usual. Whatever was happening with Ethan and Rachel, I refused to pull Maya into it. The following week, the atmosphere changed. Rachel sent me 2 more senior living links. Ethan stopped asking questions about the house. Instead, he became distant. At first, I thought perhaps the deed conversation had embarrassed him. Then I noticed something else. Whenever Rachel mentioned stairs maintenance, yard work, or the advantages of downsizing, Ethan no longer pretended the subject was casual. He agreed with her. "You'd have less to worry about. You could travel more. You don't need 4 bedrooms." Every argument sounded reasonable by itself. Together they formed a message. "You don't need this house." One evening, Rachel said, "A smaller place could actually give you more freedom." I looked at her. "I feel fairly free here." She smiled. "Of course." But I noticed Ethan watching me. That night I opened my notebook. I read every entry from the beginning. The chair, the photographs, the utility accounts. When this place is finally ours. The senior living links, the master bedroom. After Mom. The questions. The deed. For months I had treated each event separately. Now I read them as one continuous story. And I didn't like where that story was going. I closed the notebook. Then I took out my phone. There was one person I hadn't spoken to in nearly 2 years. Karen Mitchell. She had handled several legal matters for Thomas and me over the years, and after Thomas died, she'd helped make sure everything was properly updated. I found her number. My thumb hovered over it. Calling an attorney made everything feel more serious. As if I were admitting there was something inside my own family I needed protection from. For several seconds, I almost put the phone away. Then I remembered Ethan sitting across from me. Maybe we should add my name to the deed. I pressed the number. Karen answered on the 4th ring. "Mitchell Law." "Karen, it's Nicole Harper." There was a pause. Then her voice warmed. "Nicole, it's been a long time. How are you?" I looked toward my bedroom door before answering. "I think I need you to help me understand exactly what my rights are." Her tone changed immediately. About what I looked around the room Thomas and I had shared for decades. My house. Karen Mitchell did not ask me to explain everything over the phone. That was one of the things I had always liked about her. She listened to my first few sentences, then said, "Nicole, why don't you come into the office when I have an opening Tuesday morning?" I hesitated. Tuesday was one of the days Rachel usually worked from home. "I'll take it. Bring whatever documents you have. I can do that." And Nicole, yes, don't sign anything before we talk. My stomach tightened. I wasn't planning to. Good. Tuesday at 10. After we hung up, I sat on the edge of my bed for several minutes. I hadn't told Karen that Ethan had done anything illegal. Because as far as I knew, he hadn't. He'd asked questions. He'd suggested putting his name on the deed. He'd written calculations on a property assessment. None of those things were crimes. But I had reached the point where I no longer trusted myself to distinguish concern from manipulation. I needed someone who wasn't emotionally involved. Tuesday morning, I told Rachel I was meeting an old friend for coffee. That wasn't entirely true, and I felt guilty about it. Then I reminded myself that I was 68 years old and did not owe my daughter-in-law an itinerary. Karen's office was downtown in a brick building I'd visited several times with Thomas. Walking through the lobby brought back memories I wasn't prepared for. Thomas sitting beside me. Thomas complaining about parking. Thomas reading every document twice. The receptionist recognized me. "Mrs. Harper, Nicole, please." She smiled. "Ms. Mitchell will be right with you." Karen appeared a few minutes later. She was around 60, with silver beginning to show through her dark hair and the same calm expression I remembered. She hugged me. "It's good to see you. You too." Then she looked at me more carefully. "Although I'm guessing this isn't a social visit." "No." We went into her office. I had brought copies of the deed mortgage satisfaction document, estate papers, and the county property assessment. I hadn't brought Ethan's original handwritten copy. I had photographed it. When I placed my phone on Karen's desk and showed her the image, she adjusted her glasses. She read it silently. Then she looked at me. "Did Ethan put this in your file?" "I believe so." "You recognize the handwriting?" "Yes." "What does he say it means?" "I haven't asked." Karen nodded. "Good. That surprised me. You don't think I should confront him. I think you should understand your position before you have conversations that might become emotional." That sounded exactly like Thomas. Karen opened the copy of the deed. "Let's start with what we know." For the next 20 minutes, she walked me through documents I already mostly understood. The house was mine, sole ownership, no mortgage, no lien created by Ethan, no ownership interest belonging to Rachel. Nothing in the current deed gave either of them authority over the property. "They live there," Karen said, "but living in a house and owning a house are not the same thing." "I know. I want you to hear it from me anyway." I nodded. She continued. "Ethan cannot add himself to the deed without your participation. He cannot sell the property. He cannot mortgage it. He cannot decide that you have to leave simply because he believes another living arrangement would be better for you." Hearing someone say it plainly made me feel foolishly emotional. I didn't think he could. "But you've started doubting yourself." I looked down. "Yes." Karen folded her hands. "Why?" So I told her everything. Not dramatically. I didn't need to. I told her about the 6-month arrangement becoming 2 years. Thomas's chair, his office, the utility accounts, Rachel's senior living links, the conversation about my bedroom, when this place is finally ours, after Mom, the questions about taxes and my will, finally the request to put Ethan's name on the deed. Karen barely interrupted. When I finished, she leaned back. "What do you want?" The question caught me off guard. "I want them to stop." "Stop what?" "Planning my life." "Okay. And I want Ethan to understand that this is my home." "Okay." I waited for legal advice. It didn't come. Instead, Karen asked, "Do you want Ethan and his family to move out?" My mouth opened, then closed. "I don't know. Do you want to continue living in that house?" "Yes." The answer came automatically. Karen noticed. "You answered very quickly." "It's my home. I didn't ask whether it belongs to you." I stared at her. She continued gently. "I asked whether you want to live there. What's the difference? A significant one. I looked toward the window. Outside, people were walking along the sidewalk. I've lived there more than 30 years. I know. Thomas and I raised Ethan there. I know that too. Every memory I have of my marriage is in that house. Karen nodded. And what does living there feel like now? That question was harder. I thought about avoiding my own kitchen, about checking whether Rachel was home before moving Thomas's things, about hearing footsteps in Thomas's office, about sitting at dinner while my family discussed my bedroom as if I were already gone. It doesn't feel the same, I admitted. No. But selling would feel like they won. Karen's expression changed. There was no judgment in it, only recognition. Nicole, that's an important sentence. I frowned. Why? Because you just described ownership as a competition. I looked away. She let the silence sit. Then she said, "You don't have to sell. You don't have to stay. You don't have to make any decision today. But I want you to ask yourself something." I waited. "Do you still want the house, or are you keeping it because you think leaving means losing?" I didn't answer. I couldn't. For months, Ethan and Rachel had framed leaving as something that should happen to me. A transition. A sensible next step. A quiet surrender of space. So I'd begun clinging to the house not only because I loved it, but because remaining there felt like resistance. Karen leaned forward. "If you choose to stay, stay, because that's the life you want. If you choose to sell, sell, because that's the life you want. Neither choice belongs to Ethan. What if I did sell?" It was the first time I'd said the words aloud. Karen didn't react. "Then you'd sell your property. Could Ethan stop it?" "Based on what you've shown me, no." "What about the fact that they live there, that affects practical steps and timing? It doesn't make him an owner." I nodded slowly. "What would the process look like?" Karen explained. "Valuation, listing or private sale, offer, contract, title work, closing, possession terms. Nothing mysterious, nothing dramatic, just a real estate transaction." I listened more carefully than I expected. "I'm not saying I'm selling. I know. I just want to understand." "That is exactly what you should be doing." She slid my documents back toward me. Then she paused. "One more thing. Yes, your estate plan is legally your business. If you want to review it, we can. But don't change documents because you're angry. I wouldn't. And don't leave them unchanged because you're afraid of making Ethan angry." That one landed harder. I nodded. Karen smiled faintly. "Thomas used to worry about you being too generous." I looked at her. "He said that more than once." A laugh escaped me. "That sounds like him. He loved that about you. He just didn't always trust other people to know where generosity ended." For a moment, neither of us spoke. I could picture Thomas sitting in the chair beside me, tapping his fingers against the armrest. "Know what you own. Know what you owe. Ask questions." I gathered my papers. At the door, Karen touched my arm. "You're not powerless, Nicole." "I know. Do you?" I looked at her. Then I smiled. "I'm beginning to." I left the office shortly before noon, but I didn't drive home. Instead, I parked near Bird Park and sat in my car watching sunlight move across the water. For the first time, I allowed myself to imagine something I'd resisted for years. Another home. Not a senior facility chosen by Ethan. Not an apartment selected by Rachel. My home. Maybe smaller. Maybe one level. Maybe a little patio where I could grow tomatoes without maintaining an entire backyard. The thought didn't frighten me. That surprised me. It felt almost peaceful. Then another thought came. What if I sold the house before Ethan ever inherited it? The guilt arrived immediately. Why was I thinking about inheritance when I was alive? Because Ethan was. I sat there nearly an hour. When I finally returned home, Rachel's car was in the driveway. She was in the kitchen arranging flowers. "Good coffee?" she asked. I paused. "What with your friend?" "Oh, yes." She smiled. "You were gone a while." There was something about the observation that bothered me. "I had errands." She nodded. Then she lifted a vase. What do you think too much they're pretty? I started upstairs. Nicole, I turned. Ethan mentioned you two had a disagreement about the deed. There it was. I gripped the stair rail. He told you. Of course. She gave me a sympathetic look. I hope you know he was only trying to protect you. I can protect myself. Her smile faded slightly. Nobody said you couldn't. Good. I continued upstairs. Inside my bedroom, I closed the door. Then I took out my phone. I searched for recent home sales in my neighborhood. The numbers surprised me. One house 2 streets over had sold for considerably more than I expected. Another had gone under contract in 4 days. I kept scrolling. For the first time, I wasn't looking at the house as Ethan's future inheritance, or Thomas's memory, or proof that I refused to be pushed out. I was looking at it as an asset I owned, an option, a choice. That evening, I wrote one sentence in my notebook. I have choices. I underlined it. Twice. I still hadn't decided to sell my house. But something important had happened in Karen's office. Until that morning, I had been waiting to see what Ethan would do next. Now, for the first time, I had started asking myself a different question. What did I want to do next? For the next week, I did something I hadn't done in a long time. Now, for the first time, I had started asking myself a different question. What did I want to do next? For the next week, I did something I hadn't done in a long time. I imagined a future that did not require Ethan's approval. I didn't make any decisions. I simply allowed myself to look. That distinction mattered. On Wednesday morning, after Ethan left for work and Maya went to school, I called Linda Parker. Karen had given me her number. She's been selling homes in Richmond for 25 years, Karen had said. She knows how to be discreet. Discreet was exactly what I needed. Linda answered on the second ring. Linda Parker. Hello. My name is Nicole Harper. Karen Mitchell gave me your number. Her voice warmed immediately. Any friend of Karen's is someone I'll take a call from. I smiled. I don't know if I'm selling. That's perfectly fine. I may only want to know what my house is worth. That's usually where people start. We arranged to meet Friday morning. I chose a time when Ethan would be at work, Maya would be at school, and Rachel had a staging appointment. I told myself there was nothing secretive about getting a valuation on my own property. Still, when Linda's silver SUV pulled into the driveway, I found myself looking toward the neighboring houses. She noticed. You don't want a sign in the yard, she said as she stepped onto the porch. I don't even know if I want to sell. Then there won't be a sign. Linda was in her mid-50s with short dark hair and the kind of calm confidence that made me feel less ridiculous for being nervous. I showed her through the house. She didn't gush. She observed. Original hardwood floors. Updated roof. Newer HVAC. 4 bedrooms. Mature landscaping. Large backyard. Quiet street. When we reached Thomas's old office, now filled with Ethan's equipment, Linda paused. Someone working from home, my son. He lives here with his wife and daughter. For how long? Almost 2 years. She looked at me but didn't ask anything else. We continued upstairs. When we reached the master bedroom, I noticed myself studying it differently. For years it had been my room because Thomas and I had slept there. Now I noticed square footage, closet space, windows. The renovated bathroom we'd completed 7 years earlier. I wondered if this was how Ethan saw it. Not as the place where his father had kissed his mother goodnight for decades. As value. That thought hurt. But another thought followed. If he was allowed to see the house as an asset, why wasn't I? Linda finished her walkthrough and sat with me at the kitchen table. She opened a folder. I pulled recent comparable sales before coming. You did. Karen told me the neighborhood. She showed me 3 houses. One had sold for $742,000. Another for $768,000. A third, slightly smaller than mine, had sold for $751 and $500 after receiving multiple offers. I stared at the numbers. What do you think mine would sell for? Depending on presentation and timing, I'd probably position it in the mid-700s. I laughed. Not because it was funny, because I didn't know what else to do. Thomas and I had bought the house for less than $150,000. I knew prices had gone up, I said. Richmond has changed. I suppose it has. Linda studied me. Does that number make you want to sell? I thought about it. No. Good answer. I looked at her. Good, you shouldn't sell because a number excites you for 5 minutes. She closed the folder. You sell because the house no longer fits the life you want. Karen had said almost the same thing. Maybe people who worked around houses understood something the rest of us didn't. I asked, if I decided to sell, how quickly could it happen? In this market, potentially quickly. How quickly? If the price is right and the house shows well, days rather than months. My stomach tightened. Linda noticed. You don't have to decide today. I know. She gave me her card. Call me when you know what you want. After she left, I walked through the house again. This time I wasn't angry. I wasn't thinking about Ethan. I tried to imagine the rooms empty. No dining table, no Thomas chair, no photographs, just walls. It was painful. But it was also strangely clarifying. The memories weren't inside the drywall, they were inside me. That afternoon I did something else. I looked at townhouses. Not senior communities, not retirement facilities. Townhouses. Places I chose myself. I filtered for one-level living or first-floor primary bedrooms. A small yard. 2 bedrooms. Somewhere near my friends. I found one 15 minutes away with a brick patio and a sunny kitchen. Then another near a walking trail. I bookmarked both. I didn't tell anyone. Over the next 2 weeks, Linda quietly brought me information about potential buyers. One was a couple relocating from Northern Virginia. They were in their 50s, their children grown, and they wanted an established neighborhood rather than new construction. They had already lost 2 houses in competitive offers. They're motivated, Linda told me. I'm not listing, I know. But they're interested. Very. How would they even know about my house agent's talk? I smiled. Of course they do. Linda explained that if I wanted, we could explore a private showing without publicly listing the property. I agreed. 1 showing. Nothing more. The buyers came on a Tuesday afternoon while Ethan and Rachel were both away. I went to Carol's house because I couldn't bear to watch strangers inspect my life. When Linda called 90 minutes later, I almost didn't answer. They love it. I sat straighter. They do. They're preparing an offer. My heart started beating faster. I haven't agreed to sell. I told them. What happens if they make an offer? You read it. And then you can say yes, no, or nothing. That evening, Linda emailed it. The offer was higher than I expected. Strong financing, minimal contingencies, flexible closing. I printed it and sat at my bedroom desk. The amount looked unreal. With the mortgage paid even after transaction costs and purchasing another home, I would have more than enough to secure my retirement comfortably. I could travel, help Maya with college someday, build a long-term care reserve. Never worry about being financially dependent on Ethan. That last thought stopped me. I folded the offer and placed it inside my desk. I wasn't ready. Despite everything, I still hoped Ethan might surprise me. Maybe he'd apologize. Maybe he'd realize what he was doing. Maybe we'd sit together like adults and restore some version of the relationship we'd had before. For several days, he was actually pleasant. He brought me coffee one morning, asked about my walking group, fixed a loose cabinet hinge without being asked. I started wondering whether I had allowed suspicion to harden me. Then Maya came into my bedroom on Sunday evening. She sat on the edge of the bed. Grandma, yes. Are you going somewhere? The question startled me. Why would you ask that Mom and Dad keep talking about you moving? I kept my expression neutral. What do they say? She looked uncomfortable. I don't know if I'm supposed to tell you. You don't have to tell me anything that makes you uncomfortable. She picked at a loose thread on her jeans. I just don't want you to leave because of us. My chest tightened. Maya, look at me. She did. You have never made me feel unwelcome in this house. Her eyes became shiny. Dad says it would be better for everyone if you had somewhere smaller. Your father and I disagree about that. She nodded. Then she said quietly, he thinks this house is his retirement plan. I didn't move. Maya looked toward the door. I heard him talking to Mom. What exactly did he say? He said once the house was his, they wouldn't have to worry so much about retirement. My throat went dry. Did he say when he thought the house would become his? She shook her head. No. Then she added, Mom said they just had to be patient. Patient. I looked away. Maya immediately looked frightened. Grandma, I'm sorry. I shouldn't have no. I took her hand. You didn't do anything wrong. Are you mad not at you? She leaned against me. I put my arm around her. For several minutes we sat without speaking. After she went to bed, I remained there. I thought about the property assessment. After Mom. The deed. The senior living communities. The bedroom. And now, retirement plan. They weren't simply hoping to inherit someday. They had incorporated my house into their financial expectations. My future had become a delay in theirs. I walked to my desk. The buyer's offer was still in the drawer. I took it out. For the first time, I read every page without feeling guilty. Then I placed it beside my phone. The next morning, Ethan left at 7:45. Rachel left shortly after 8. At 8:20, I called Linda. She answered cheerfully. Good morning, Nicole. Is that couple still interested? There was a brief pause. Yes. Is the offer still open until tomorrow evening? I looked through the kitchen window at the dogwood tree Thomas and I had planted more than 30 years earlier. For a moment, grief rose in my chest. Then I remembered Karen's question. Do you still want the house, or are you keeping it because you think leaving means losing? I need a little more information about the next step, I said. Linda's voice remained calm. Of course. I wasn't ready to sign. Not yet. But I was no longer waiting for Ethan to decide what happened to me. And for the first time, the possibility of selling my house didn't feel like being forced out. It felt like a door I could choose to open. Linda did not pressure me. That mattered. She explained what would happen if I accepted the offer, what inspections the buyers could request, how closing would work, and what kind of possession timeline could be negotiated. Then she said, You don't have to decide while we're on the phone. I know. Take the day. I thanked her and hung up. The offer remained on my kitchen table for nearly an hour. I kept walking past it. Coffee, laundry, mail, then back to the offer. All my life I'd thought major decisions would feel dramatic when they arrived. They rarely did. Sometimes the biggest choices of your life sat quietly beside a bowl of bananas while the dishwasher ran. I still didn't sign. There was one part of me that wanted to give Ethan one final chance without telling him that was what I was doing. Not because I believed I owed him another chance, because I needed to know I wasn't acting from anger. If I sold the house, I wanted to know I had done it with a clear mind. That evening, Ethan came home carrying a bottle of wine. What's the occasion, I asked. Family dinner tomorrow. I looked up. Since when do we need wine to have dinner? He smiled. Rachel and I want to talk about some things. There was something rehearsed about his tone. What things? Nothing bad. He kissed my cheek. Just plans. Plans. That word stayed with me all night. The next afternoon, Rachel spent more time than usual preparing dinner. She made roast chicken, rosemary, potatoes, green beans, and a lemon pie. It reminded me of the meals people prepare before delivering difficult news. Maya noticed the atmosphere, too. Is somebody getting divorced? She asked, as she set napkins on the table. Rachel nearly dropped a serving spoon. What, no? Then why are we having fancy dinner on a Wednesday? Families are allowed to eat together. Maya looked at me and raised one eyebrow. I almost smiled. At 6:30, Ethan came downstairs from his office carrying a navy folder. The moment I saw it, my appetite disappeared. He placed it beside his plate. Rachel sat across from me. Maya sat at the end of the table. For the first 15 minutes, nobody mentioned the folder. Ethan talked about work. Rachel talked about a staging client. Maya described an argument between two girls at school. I waited. Finally, when the plates were nearly empty, Ethan wiped his mouth with his napkin. So, Mom. There it was. I set down my fork. Yes. He placed the folder in front of him. Rachel and I have been doing some research about your options. Maya immediately looked at me. My options for what Ethan gave me, the patient expression I'd come to hate. Living arrangements. I leaned back. I already have a living arrangement. Mom, I live here. We know. Rachel spoke gently. We're just trying to think ahead. Ethan opened the folder. Inside were printed pages. He turned them toward me. The first page showed a brick apartment building surrounded by trees. The heading read, River Glen Senior Residences. I stared at it. You've got to be kidding. Just look, Ethan said. I've looked at enough of these. This one is different. How Rachel leaned forward. It's independent living, not assisted living. I don't need either. Nobody said you need anything. Then why are we discussing it? Ethan tapped the page. Because this place actually makes sense. He began listing features. Elevators, fitness center, community room, emergency maintenance, transportation, walking trails. I let him finish. Then I asked, Have you been there? Rachel answered. We toured it Saturday. Maya's head snapped toward her mother. You did? Rachel looked uncomfortable. We wanted to see whether it was worth showing Grandma. I stared at them. You toured an apartment for me. It wasn't an apartment for you yet, Ethan said. Yet, he exhaled. That's not what I meant. I turned another page. There were floor plans. 1 bedroom, 2 bedroom, measurements. Rachel had written notes beside several rooms. Love seat fits here. Nicole's dining set too large. Keep bedroom dresser. My fingers stopped. You've decided which furniture I'm taking. Rachel's face reddened. I was only thinking practically. You measured my furniture. I know the dimensions from helping rearrange things. That's supposed to make me feel better. Ethan leaned forward. Mom, please don't turn this into something it isn't. I closed the folder. Then tell me what it is. He glanced at Rachel. She looked down. Finally, Ethan said, We think this house is too much for you. You think? Yes. And I don't. You're not being realistic. About what you're 68. I almost laughed. You say that like I'm 98. That's not fair. Neither is planning my move without asking whether I want one. We're trying to prevent a crisis before there is one. What crisis? Crisis the stairs, the yard, maintenance. Living in a house this size. You live here. He paused. What if this house is so difficult to manage? Why do you want to stay silent? Rachel reached for her water. Ethan's expression hardened. This isn't about us. I think it is. Maya stared at her plate. I opened the folder again. I looked at the floor plan Rachel had annotated. Then I asked the question I already knew the answer to. If I move to River Glen, what happens to this house? Ethan answered immediately. We stay here. There it was. No hesitation. No discussion. No suggestion they would find another place. We stay here. I looked at him. You stay. It makes the most sense. For whom? For everyone. Explain how. He sat straighter. Maya's school is nearby. My commute works. Rachel has clients in this area. Moving the 3 of us when you're one person doesn't make financial sense. I felt heat rise into my face. One person. That's not what I meant. I'm one person, so I should move. Mom, you're twisting everything. Rachel finally spoke. We could take care of the house. I turned to her. I take care of the house. We know. Then what problem are you solving? Neither answered. Maya pushed her chair back slightly. This is weird. Rachel looked at her. Maya. No, it is. Maya, stay out of this, Ethan said. She looked at him. You're talking about Grandma like she's not sitting here. Maya. She's right here. I reached across the table. Sweetheart, it's okay. No, it's not. Her eyes were wet. Are you making Grandma leave? Ethan's face changed. Nobody is making anyone do anything. I looked at him. Then say it. What say that if I want to live here, you'll stop bringing up moving? He stared at me. The room became very still. Mom, that's not reasonable. And there was my answer. I felt something inside me finally break. Not loudly. There was no explosion. It was more like a thread snapping. For almost 2 years I had kept hoping Ethan would eventually remember whose house this was, whose life this was, whose decision this was. But he wasn't confused. He genuinely believed his plan was more reasonable than my wishes. I stood. I'm done with this conversation. Ethan stood too. We haven't finished. I have. Mom, sit down. I turned. He froze. Perhaps he heard himself. Perhaps he saw my face. I am not one of your employees, I said. And I am not a child, I know. Then don't tell me to sit down in my own house. Rachel closed the folder. Everybody's emotional. No. I looked at her. I'm actually seeing things very clearly. I went upstairs. Behind me, I heard Maya say, Dad, you should apologize. I didn't hear his answer. Inside my bedroom, I closed the door and sat on the edge of the bed. My hands were shaking. I looked at Thomas's photograph on the dresser. I whispered. I didn't know whether I was speaking to him or myself. I had tried to be patient, tried to understand, tried to believe every uncomfortable moment had an innocent explanation. But there comes a point when patience stops being kindness and becomes permission. I walked to my desk. Linda's offer was inside the drawer. I took it out. The expiration was the following evening. I read the price again, then the terms, then the closing timeline. I picked up my phone. My thumb hovered over Linda's number. Before I could call, there was a knock. Mom, Ethan. I didn't answer. He knocked again. Can we talk? Not tonight. A pause. We're only trying to help. I closed my eyes. No, Ethan. You're trying to decide. Another pause. Then his footsteps moved away. I waited until I heard his bedroom door close. At 9:47 p.m., I called Linda. She answered quietly. Nicole. I'm sorry it's late. It's fine. Is the offer still available? Yes. I looked at the bedroom I'd shared with Thomas, the room Ethan had already imagined using. I want to move forward. Linda paused. Are you sure? I appreciated that she asked. I'm sure I want the next step. Then tomorrow we'll go through everything carefully. Thank you. After we hung up, I didn't feel victorious. I cried. Not because I was losing the house, because I finally understood that the house I'd spent months defending had become the thing standing between me and the truth about my son. The next morning, however, I still hadn't signed the final acceptance. Linda and Karen were reviewing several details first. I went downstairs. Ethan was already in the kitchen. On the table in front of my chair sat another glossy brochure from River Glen. He pushed it toward me. Mom, we need to finish the conversation from last night. I didn't touch it. He looked tired but determined. I know you don't like hearing this, he said, but somebody has to be practical. I stared at him. Then he said the words that ended whatever hesitation I had left. You can't keep living here just because you're emotionally attached to the place. At some point, you have to think about what's best for everyone. I looked at my son for a long time. He had already chosen what was best for everyone. He simply hadn't included me in the definition. And I knew then that the next conversation would be the one neither Ethan nor Rachel was prepared for. I looked at the River Glen brochure Ethan had pushed across the kitchen table. A smiling silver-haired woman stood on the cover holding a cup of coffee on a sunlit balcony. She looked perfectly happy. Maybe she was. That wasn't the point. The point was that I hadn't chosen River Glen. Ethan had. I thought we finished this conversation last night, I said. We didn't finish anything. He sat across from me. Rachel was standing at the counter pouring coffee. She hadn't said good morning. I glanced toward the clock. 7:28. Maya had already left for school. I wished she were there, then immediately felt guilty for thinking it. This wasn't her fight. Ethan leaned forward. Mom, nobody is trying to hurt you. I never said you were. You've been acting like we're trying to throw you into some nursing home. I haven't used those words either. Then what exactly is the problem? I almost couldn't believe he was asking. The problem is that you've decided where I should live without asking me. We did ask. No, you showed me your decision. Rachel turned from the counter. It wasn't a decision. I looked at her. You toured River Glen. We toured it to get information. You measured which furniture of mine would fit. She looked down. Ethan sighed. You're focusing on details, because details tell me what you've already planned. He leaned back. Fine. Let's start over. All right. What do you want? I want to live in my house without being pressured to leave it. His face tightened. That's not a long-term plan. It doesn't need to be your long-term plan. Mom. No, Ethan. Listen to me. He went quiet. For once I didn't soften my voice. I am healthy. I drive. I manage my finances. I see my doctor. I walk several miles every week. I have friends. I have a lawyer. I have savings. There is no crisis requiring you to reorganize my life. I never said there was a crisis. Then stop behaving as though one is coming next Tuesday. Rachel folded her arms. Planning ahead isn't a bad thing. No. Planning someone else's future without their permission is. Ethan rubbed his forehead. You're making this impossible. I stared at him. What am I making impossible? He didn't answer. That silence told me more than words could have. I pushed the brochure back toward him. I don't want this. He didn't take it. Instead, he said, You're being emotional because this house reminds you of Dad. The words hit me like a slap. Yes, I said. It does. That doesn't mean staying here forever makes sense. I never said forever. You act like selling would be some betrayal of him. That was almost funny, because I'd spent the previous night preparing to do exactly that. But Ethan didn't know, and for the first time I understood the strange advantage of knowing something he didn't. I could listen. Really listen. I think Dad would have wanted you somewhere easier, Ethan continued. That crossed a line. Don't. He stopped. Don't what? Don't use your father to convince me to do something you want. His face hardened. That's not what I'm doing. It is exactly what you're doing. Rachel quietly left the kitchen. I heard her footsteps move toward the hallway. Maybe she wanted to give us privacy. Maybe she didn't want to be present for what came next. Ethan stared at the brochure. Then he said, Can I be honest? I wish you would. His eyes lifted to mine. This house doesn't make sense for one person. Again. One person. I waited. We're 4 people living here. 3 of you came here temporarily. That was 2 years ago. The length of time doesn't rewrite the agreement. He laughed without humor. So what? We're supposed to pack up tomorrow? I didn't say that. Then what are you saying? I'm saying this house is mine. I know it's legally yours. Legally. That word caught my attention. Not yours. Legally yours. As though the deed were a technical inconvenience. I folded my hands. What does that mean? What you said legally, because that's what you're turning this into. I haven't mentioned the law. You went through all the paperwork. My stomach tightened. How do you know that? He hesitated. You've been asking questions. That doesn't answer me. He looked away. I can tell. I studied him. Had he noticed the documents had been moved? Had he gone looking for the property assessment? I decided not to ask. Not yet, Ethan continued. Forget the paperwork for a second. I'm talking about family. Family doesn't erase ownership. No, but family should matter more than ownership. Interesting. What does that mean? It means ownership only seems unimportant when you're talking about mine. He stared at me. I continued. You asked me to put your name on the deed. Clearly ownership matters to you. That was about helping. No. I shook my head. It was about access. That's ridiculous. Then why did you need your name on it? He pushed his chair back. I don't know why I even bother. Neither do I. He stood and walked toward the window. For a few seconds I watched his shoulders rise and fall. Then he turned around. Do you know what this family needs? I almost smiled. I'm sure you're going to tell me. We need stability. You have stability. No, we don't. His voice rose. We've spent 2 years trying to recover financially. Maya finally has consistency. Rachel's business is doing better. I'm doing better at work. For once, things are settling down. And now you're acting like everything could change because you're upset. There it was. The truth underneath all the softer arguments. Ethan wasn't planning only for my future. He was protecting his comfort. You're afraid I'll ask you to leave. He didn't answer. You're afraid you'll have to pay for your own house again. That's not fair. Is it false? His jaw tightened. We contribute. You buy groceries sometimes. I maintain the property. I pay the taxes, insurance, utilities, repairs, landscaping, and every major household expense. His face flushed. I didn't ask you to do that. You didn't have to. It's my house. He looked toward the hallway where Rachel had disappeared, then back at me. I don't understand why you're suddenly keeping score. I started keeping score when you started planning my departure. I am not planning your departure. You toured an apartment for me. Because you need to consider reality. What reality? He stared at me. Then he said it. The reality that it's time. I felt something inside me become completely still. Time for what? He hesitated only a second. Mom, I think it's time you moved out. There it was. No more suggestions. No more links. No more hypotheticals. A direct sentence. I looked at him. Say that again. He swallowed. I don't want to fight. Neither do I. Say it again. His voice lowered. I think it's time you moved out. Of my house. He rubbed his forehead. Mom. Of my house, Ethan. Yes. The word hung in the kitchen. I heard Rachel moving somewhere down the hallway. She didn't return. I looked around the room. The cabinets. Thomas and I had refinished ourselves. The breakfast nook where Ethan had done homework. The doorway where we'd marked his height in pencil until he was 15. My son was asking me to leave all of it so he could remain. Why should I be the one who moves? He looked exhausted now. Because it makes the most sense. For you, for everybody. No, for you. He sat again. You'd be happier somewhere smaller. You don't know that. You'd have people your age around. I have friends. You wouldn't have to worry about maintenance. I don't worry about maintenance. Mom, you're refusing to hear me. I hear you perfectly. He went silent. Then frustration finally broke through. You're holding on to a 4-bedroom house you don't need while your family actually needs the space. I stared at him. My family. Yes. Am I part of that family? His face changed. Of course. Then why is what I need the only thing that doesn't matter? He opened his mouth. Nothing came out. That was the moment. Not the senior brochures, not after Mom, not even the deed. That silence was the moment I stopped hoping Ethan would fix this for me. I looked down at the brochure. Then I folded it once. Carefully. All right. He blinked. What all right? His shoulders relaxed. The change was immediate. Relief. He actually looked relieved. You'll think about River Glen. I'll think about moving. He nodded. That's all I'm asking. No, it wasn't. But I didn't correct him. Instead, I asked, what time are you leaving for work tomorrow? He looked confused. Why I have things to do. I don't want our cars blocking each other. Oh. He glanced at his phone. Probably 7:30. Okay. He smiled cautiously. Mom, I know this is hard. I stood. You have no idea. I went upstairs. Inside my bedroom, I locked the door. Then I called Linda. I've made my decision. About the offer. Yes. Do you want me to come over? Not today. I looked toward the hallway. Tomorrow morning. What time? 8. There was a pause. Are you certain I thought about Ethan's relief when I said I'd move? Yes. That night I walked through the house after everyone went to sleep. I touched the dining table, the stair rail, the doorway of Thomas's old office. Finally, I stood beside his leather chair. I guess we're moving, I whispered. I expected the words to break me. They didn't. For the first time, leaving did not feel like Ethan was winning. Because he had made one enormous mistake. He thought that if I moved out, the house stayed with him. At 7:30 the next morning, I stood behind the living room curtain and watched Ethan's car back out of the driveway. He waved through the windshield. I waved back. Then I waited until his car disappeared around the corner. At 7:32, I picked up my phone. Linda answered. Good morning, Nicole. Good morning. Still sure, I looked around my house one last time as someone waiting for permission. Then I smiled. Completely. At 8 o'clock exactly. Linda Parker pulled into my driveway. No sign. No photographer. No cheerful real estate assistant carrying balloons or folders with sold printed across them. Just Linda, a leather portfolio, and a calm expression. Karen arrived 15 minutes later. Seeing both women walk into my kitchen made the decision suddenly feel real. Linda placed her portfolio on the table. Before we do anything, she said, I'm going to ask you one more time. I knew the question. Do you want to sell? I looked around the kitchen. For 30 years, nearly every important family conversation had happened in that room. Ethan had told us where he wanted to go to college there. Thomas had told me his father was dying there. Maya had once sat at the island with chocolate frosting covering half her face, while Thomas laughed so hard he couldn't take the picture properly. And less than 24 hours earlier, my son had sat across from me and told me it was time I moved out. Yes, I said. Linda didn't smile. She simply nodded. Then we'll proceed. Karen opened her folder. The buyer's attorney sent the revised language last night. I reviewed it this morning. I sat between them. It felt strange to have an attorney present for something that on paper was simple. But Karen had insisted. You don't need a protection from the buyers, she'd told me. You need clarity. So we went through everything. Purchase price, inspection terms, financing, closing date, possession. The buyers, Mark and Evelyn Dawson, were willing to give me several weeks to arrange my move. More importantly, they understood that Ethan, Rachel, and Maya lived in the house and would also need time to relocate. I didn't want revenge. I didn't want Ethan returning from work to find his belongings on the sidewalk. I wanted control of my life back. Those were different things. Linda slid the acceptance documents toward me. You can still stop. I picked up the pen. Karen watched me. Neither woman rushed me. My hand trembled slightly. Then I signed. Nicole Harper. The signature looked ordinary. But when I put down the pen, something inside me shifted. Linda gathered the pages. Congratulations. I laughed softly. That feels like a strange word. What would you prefer I thought about it? Ask me in a month. She smiled. Fair enough. The transaction still had steps ahead, but the decision was made. For the first time since Ethan moved in, the future of the house had been decided by the person whose name was actually on it. Me. Karen left first. At the door, she hugged me. How do you feel? Terrified. Anything else? I considered the question. Lighter. She smiled. That's worth paying attention to. Linda stayed behind because we had another appointment. At 10:30, she drove me to see the townhouse I'd bookmarked weeks earlier. I'd already toured it once quietly, but this time I wasn't looking as someone daydreaming. I was looking as a buyer. It was on a quiet street about 15 minutes from my old neighborhood. Red brick, 2 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, a small study. The primary bedroom was on the first floor. No staircase required for daily living. That fact made me laugh when I noticed it. What Linda asked. My son has spent months telling me stairs are dangerous. Linda waited, and I suppose I'll eliminate the stairs. She smiled. On your terms. Exactly. The kitchen was smaller than mine, but sunlight came through a wide window above the sink. There was a little patio out back with enough space for a table, several pots of herbs, and maybe 2 tomato plants. No enormous yard, no landscaping contract, no rooms I had to keep simply because they contained memories. I stood in the living room. I imagined Thomas's leather chair beside the window. Not hidden in a garage, not treated like clutter. Mine to keep wherever I wanted. Could I have a guest room? I asked. Linda looked amused. You have 2 bedrooms. I know. Then yes. For Maya. The words came automatically. Linda's expression softened. You want your granddaughter to stay with you whenever she wants. I walked into the second bedroom. It was small, but there was enough space for a bed, a desk, and the quilt Maya liked. I could see it. Not a retirement facility, not exile, home. I said. Linda blinked. You don't want to think I've been thinking for months. That afternoon we submitted an offer. The seller was an older man moving closer to his daughter in North Carolina. By early evening, Linda called. Accepted. I sat alone in my bedroom when she told me. For a moment I couldn't speak. Nicole, I'm here. You okay? Yes. I looked around the room. I think I am. I now had a buyer for the house. Ethan expected to inherit, and an accepted offer on a home he didn't even know existed. The irony wasn't lost on me. But neither transaction felt like revenge. That mattered. I wasn't buying a mansion to humiliate him. I wasn't wasting money. I wasn't trying to leave Ethan homeless. I was downsizing. Exactly as he'd suggested, just not in the way he'd planned. At 4:30, Linda returned briefly to drop off copies of paperwork. We were standing near the front door when she said, "I'll put the lockbox here tomorrow unless you want another location." I looked toward the driveway. Ethan usually came home around 5:30. Tomorrow, unless you'd rather wait. I thought about hiding everything longer. Then I realized I was tired of hiding. Tomorrow is fine. After Linda left, I made tea. Rachel returned at 5:10. She entered carrying shopping bags. "Hey Nicole, hello." She placed the bags on the counter. "You seem better today." "Do I?" "Yeah." She smiled cautiously. "I know last night was difficult. It was useful." Her expression changed. "Useful, I learned a few things." Before she could ask what I meant, Maya came through the front door. "Grandma." She walked into the kitchen and hugged me. "Can you help me with something for English, of course?" Rachel watched us. I wondered what she would say when she learned there would always be a room for Maya in my new home. Then Ethan arrived. He looked cheerful. That hurt more than I expected. He kissed Rachel. "Hey." Then he looked at me. "Everything okay?" "Everything's fine." "Good." He opened the refrigerator. "Did you look at River Glen?" "I looked at somewhere to live." He turned. "Really?" The relief appeared again. "Yeah, yes. What did you think?" "I think I'll be very comfortable." He smiled. "See, that's all we wanted." I almost told him, right there. But something stopped me. Maybe I wanted one final evening in the house before it became a battlefield. Maybe I wanted Maya to have dinner without hearing her parents panic. So I simply said, "You were right about one thing." Ethan leaned against the counter. "What?" "It may be time for a change." His smile widened. "I knew once you gave it a chance." I raised my hand. "I said you were right about one thing." He laughed. "Okay." We ate dinner together. Ethan talked about work. Rachel discussed a client. Maya complained about homework. I listened. Nobody knew that the house around them was under contract. Nobody knew I had made an offer on another home. And for once their ignorance didn't make me feel dishonest. It made me realize how much of my own life I'd been explaining to people who believed they had veto power over it. The next morning, Ethan left at 7:28. Rachel drove Maya to school before heading to an appointment. At 9, Linda arrived. She attached a discreet electronic lockbox near the side entrance for the inspector and authorized professionals. She handed me the information packet. "The inspection is Thursday." "Okay. You still comfortable?" "Yes." At 3:30, the inspection notice and transaction documents were sitting inside a folder on my desk. I heard Rachel come home. At 5:38, the garage door opened. Ethan was back. I was in the living room reading when I heard the front door open again a minute later. Then silence. Long silence. "Mom." I closed my book. His voice sounded different. I stood. Ethan was in the hallway holding his briefcase. His face was pale. He pointed toward the side of the house. "Why is there a real estate lockbox outside?" Rachel appeared behind him. "A what?" Ethan looked directly at me. "Mom." I set my book on the table. "What is going on?" I walked toward them. For months, Ethan had been preparing me to leave my house. He had chosen the type of place, discussed my furniture, imagined his bedroom, calculated my equity, all while assuming one thing, that when I left the house would remain exactly where it was, waiting for him. I looked at my son. "You said it was time I moved out." His forehead creased. "Yes, but so I am." Rachel stared at me. Ethan shook his head. "I don't understand." "You will." I walked past them toward the kitchen. Behind me, I heard Ethan follow. "Mom, what did you do?" I stopped. Then I turned around. For the first time in 2 years, I didn't feel like a guest in my own home. I made my own arrangements. His eyes moved toward the window, toward the lockbox outside, then back to me. and I watched the first trace of fear appear on my son's face. Ethan followed me into the kitchen so closely that I could hear his breathing behind me. Rachel came after him. Neither of them sat down. I did. That seemed to make Ethan even more nervous. He placed his briefcase on the counter. What arrangements? I looked at him. You asked me to move. I know what I said, so I made arrangements to move. His eyes narrowed. What does that have to do with a real estate lockbox? Rachel's face changed before Ethan's did. She understood first. Nicole. I turned toward her. She stared at me. You didn't. I said nothing. Ethan looked between us. Didn't what Rachel whispered, sell the house. For several seconds Ethan didn't move. Then he laughed. It was a short, nervous sound. No. I folded my hands on the table. Yes. His smile disappeared. What do you mean, yes? I mean I accepted an offer. You accepted an offer on what I almost couldn't believe the question. This house. His face went pale. You sold the house. The transaction is moving forward. You sold the house. This time he nearly shouted it. From upstairs I heard a door open. Maya. I immediately lowered my voice. Don't yell. You sold our house without telling us. There it was. Our house. I looked directly at him. My house. Ethan stared at me. Rachel stepped closer to the table. Nicole, please tell me this isn't final. I signed the acceptance. When yesterday. Rachel pressed one hand against her forehead. Oh my God. Ethan began pacing. You can't do that. I already did. No, I mean legally. You can't just sell a house when people are living in it. I can sell property I own. We live here. Yes, we've lived here for 2 years. Yes. He pointed toward the hallway, as though the length of his residency somehow created a deed. Maya lives here. I know. Her school is here. Her school isn't inside this house. His face flushed. You know what I mean. I do. Rachel pulled out a chair. When is closing? I told her. She stared at me. That's not enough time. The possession terms give us reasonable time to move. Us. Yes, I'm moving too. Ethan stopped pacing. Where I bought a townhouse. That silenced both of them. Rachel blinked. You bought another house, a townhouse. When my offer was accepted yesterday. Ethan looked as though I'd started speaking another language. You bought a place without telling me. I almost laughed. Why would I need to tell you? Because I'm your son. That doesn't make you my real estate agent. This is insane. No, Ethan. It's organized. You made 2 major financial decisions in secret. I made decisions about my own property and my own money. He stared at me. Then his expression hardened. This is because of what I said yesterday. No. Of course it is. I started exploring the sale weeks ago. That stopped him. Weeks? Yes. Rachel looked at me carefully. You were planning this. I was considering it. While we were living here, I turned toward her. You were touring apartments for me while I was living here. She looked away. Ethan put both hands on the counter. You're punishing us. No. What else would you call it? A decision. You waited until I went to work and sold the house. I accepted the offer while you were at work, because that was when I chose to handle the paperwork. He laughed bitterly. You knew exactly what you were doing. Yes. That answer surprised him. I continued. I knew I was selling an asset that belongs to me. I knew I was purchasing a home that fits the life I want, and I knew I wasn't going to ask permission. Ethan stepped back. I can't believe this. Maya appeared in the doorway. What's happening? All 3 of us turned. Her eyes moved from her father to me. Why is everyone yelling? I stood. Sweetheart, nobody needs to yell. Ethan immediately said, Your grandmother sold the house. Maya looked at me. You did? Yes. Are you leaving? Yes. Her face fell. I crossed the room. But I bought another place nearby. How nearby? About 15 minutes. Can I still come over? The question broke my heart. Of course. I touched her cheek. You'll have your own room. She stared at me. I will. Yes. Her shoulders relaxed slightly. Behind her, Ethan said, This isn't about sleepovers, Maya. I turned. It is to her. Rachel stood. Maya go upstairs for a few minutes. She hesitated. It's okay, I told her. She hugged me quickly before leaving. Ethan watched her go. Then he turned back to me. I'm calling an attorney. Karen had warned me this might happen. All right. His eyebrows rose. You don't care. You're entitled to legal advice. He grabbed his phone. Rachel said, Ethan, maybe we should first know. He was already scrolling. She can't sell a house out from under people living in it. I remained seated. The anger that might once have frightened me now felt almost predictable. Ethan made 2 calls. The first attorney apparently couldn't speak immediately. The second did. He walked into Thomas's old office and shut the door. Rachel sat across from me. For a while, neither of us spoke. Then she asked quietly, What are we supposed to do? There was no accusation in her voice now, only fear. Find somewhere to live. She looked down. You make that sound simple. No, I don't think it will be simple. We don't have enough saved for a big deposit and moving expenses right now. That confirmed something I had suspected. You've had nearly 2 years without rent. Her face reddened. We've had other expenses. I know. Ethan's investment loss was worse than he told you. I studied her. How much worse? She shook her head. You need to ask him. I did ask questions 2 years ago. He was embarrassed. I looked toward Thomas's old office. For almost 2 years, I'd assumed they were rebuilding their finances. Now I wondered what they'd actually been building. Rachel continued. We thought we'd have more time. More time for what? She didn't answer. She didn't need to. More time in my house. More time without rent. More time before the future they'd imagined had to become reality. The office door opened. Ethan came out. The anger had changed. He looked unsettled. What did the attorney say? I asked. I ignored the question. Where's the deed? Somewhere safe. I want to see it. You've already seen it. His eyes flickered. That was confirmation enough. You went through my files. He froze. Rachel looked at him. Ethan, I was checking something. My private documents. I wasn't stealing anything. I didn't say you were. His face tightened. The deed only has your name. Yes. And Dad's estate transferred everything correctly. Yes. So technically, I held up my hand. Don't say technically. He stopped. This house is not technically mine. It is mine. He looked toward the floor. I realized what the attorney had told him. Exactly what Karen had told me. Living there didn't make him an owner. Expectation didn't make him an owner. Being my son didn't make him an owner. Rachel whispered, Can the sale be stopped? Ethan looked at her, then at me. Not unless she wants to stop it. Silence filled the kitchen. For months, Ethan had spoken as if he were the practical one, and I was the emotional obstacle. Now the paperwork had reduced everything to one simple fact. He had no authority over my house. He looked at me. Cancel it. No. Mom. No. We can fix this. What are you going to fix? His voice softened. We'll stop talking about you moving. I almost felt sorry for him. Ethan, I'm already moving. You don't have to. I want to. That answer seemed to hurt him more than anything else. He had expected me to cling to the house, expected my attachment to Thomas, and our memories to make me predictable. But something had changed. I found a place I like, I said. It's smaller, it's easier to maintain, it has a patio, Maya will have a room. Rachel looked at me. So you're doing exactly what we suggested, in one sense. Then why sell this house? I looked at her. Because downsizing means I decide what happens to the property I'm leaving. Ethan's mouth tightened. You know we expected to stay. Yes. And you did this anyway. Yes. He stared at me for a long time. Then he said something that revealed more than he intended. That house was supposed to be part of my future. Not this house. That house. As though it were already an asset being transferred between stages of his life. I felt strangely calm. Who told you that? I didn't answer. Did I silence? Did your father? His expression shifted. Again silence. Then where did that promise come from? He looked away. I stood. You built plans around something nobody gave you. His voice dropped. I'm your only child, and I am still alive. He flinched. I hadn't raised my voice. I didn't need to. Then I remembered something Karen had said about Thomas. He used to worry about you being too generous. I looked at Ethan. There was an older piece of this story, something that began long before River Glen, long before Ethan moved into my house. And suddenly I knew it was time he heard it. Sit down, I said. He looked at me. Why? Because if we're finally going to talk about what you thought you were entitled to inherit, then we're going to talk about what your father actually wanted. The anger disappeared from Ethan's face. For the first time that evening, he looked uncertain. What does Dad have to do with this? I walked toward the stairs. More than you realize. And as I went upstairs to retrieve the letter Thomas had left behind, I understood that selling the house was only the first truth my son was going to have to face. The letter was inside the fireproof document box at the bank, so I couldn't simply walk upstairs and bring it down. What I did have was a copy. Karen had made it for me after Thomas died, along with copies of several documents we might need during the estate process. I kept that copy inside an envelope at the back of my bedroom closet. For years I hadn't looked at it. I knew what it said. Or at least I thought I did. That evening, standing in front of Ethan after he told me the house was supposed to be part of his future, I realized he needed to hear Thomas's words more than I did. I went upstairs and found the envelope. When I returned, Ethan and Rachel were sitting at the kitchen table. Neither was speaking. I placed the envelope between us. Ethan looked at it. What is that, a letter from your father? His face changed. When did he write it? About a year before he died. Rachel shifted in her chair. Should I leave? I looked at Ethan. He shook his head. No. So I sat. Before opening the envelope, I said, There's something you need to remember. Ethan frowned. What, Charlotte? His expression tightened immediately. Rachel looked down. That told me she'd heard the story. Years earlier, Ethan had invested money in a small medical supply distribution company started by a former college friend in Charlotte, North Carolina. At first, it sounded promising. Ethan wasn't reckless. At least Thomas and I hadn't thought so. He had a good job, a young family, and enough confidence to make risk sound like opportunity. Then the business began failing. The first call came late one night. Ethan was 33. Maya was 7. Mom, I messed up. Those were the first words he said. Thomas and I drove to his house the next morning. The situation was worse than Ethan initially admitted. He had put personal savings into the company, then more. Then he'd personally guaranteed part of a business loan. He had also used credit cards to cover expenses while waiting for contracts that never materialized. Rachel hadn't known the full amount. By the time everything collapsed, Ethan was facing debt that could have damaged his family for years. Thomas was furious. Not because Ethan had failed. Thomas understood failure. Construction had taught him that even good plans could collapse. What angered him was that Ethan had hidden the truth until there were almost no good options left. You don't get to protect people from bad news by lying to them, Thomas told him. Ethan sat at our dining table with his head down. I still remembered that image. My grown son looking like a frightened teenager. We helped him. Of course we did. That was what parents do, I told myself. Thomas and I used part of our savings to settle the most urgent obligations and help Ethan avoid a much deeper financial crisis. It wasn't enough to make us poor, but it wasn't a small amount. Ethan promised to repay us. For a while he did. Monthly transfers arrived. Then Maya needed dental work. Payments became smaller. Then Ethan changed jobs. A month was missed, then another. Eventually the payments almost disappeared. I told Thomas to let it go. He has a family. So do we, Thomas said. He's our son. I know exactly who he is. I remember becoming angry with Thomas. We don't need the money right now. That's not the point. What is the point? The point is that every time Ethan falls, you put a pillow underneath him before he hits the floor. He needed us. Thomas looked tired. I needed consequences too. At the time I thought he was being too hard. Now sitting across from Ethan almost a decade later, I understood what Thomas had seen. I looked at my son. You remember what we did after Charlotte? Yes. Do you remember what you promised? His jaw tightened. To pay you back. You stopped. I paid a lot of it. You paid some of it, Rachel said quietly. Nicole, we had expenses. I know. Ethan looked defensive. Dad told me not to worry about it anymore. No, I shook my head. He told you he wasn't going to chase you for it. Same thing. It wasn't the same thing to him. Ethan stared at the envelope. What does this have to do with the house everything? I opened it. Thomas's handwriting filled 2 pages. I didn't read every line aloud. Some of it belonged only to me. But I read the part Ethan needed to hear. Nicole, if I go first, promise me, you will never make yourself financially dependent on Ethan just because he's our son. Ethan's eyes lifted. I continued. You are generous when you are afraid someone you love will struggle. Ethan knows this even if he doesn't mean to take advantage of it. The house must be your security before it is ever anyone's inheritance. The kitchen became silent. Rachel looked at Ethan. I kept reading. If you need to sell it, sell it. If you need the money, use it. If you want to live there until you're 90, do that. Nobody gets to stand beside your life waiting for their turn. My voice broke slightly on the final sentence. I stopped. Thomas had always been better at saying difficult things plainly. Ethan looked at the table. He wrote that about me. He wrote it about protecting me. Because of me. Partly. His face reddened. I can't believe Dad thought I'd take your house. He didn't say that. That's basically what he said. No. I folded the letter. He said I shouldn't organize my future around protecting yours. Ethan pushed his chair back slightly. That's unfair. Is it? Yes. He looked at me. I never asked you to give me the house. You asked me to leave it. That isn't the same thing. And what did you expect would happen after I left? He opened his mouth. Nothing came. I waited. Finally, he said, eventually, it would have come to me. Maybe. His eyes narrowed. What does that mean? It means inheritance is what someone chooses to leave after they die. It isn't property you own while they're alive. I'm your only child. You keep saying that like it's a deed, Rachel whispered Ethan. He ignored her. So what were you going to do? Give it away. I hadn't decided. That was true. Until recently I had assumed Ethan would inherit most of what remained. But Thomas had deliberately structured our estate, so my security came first. There was no promise that the house itself would remain untouched. No instruction that I preserve it for Ethan. Thomas had understood something I hadn't. An inheritance should be whatever remains after a person has lived their own life, not a reservation placed on their future. Ethan looked at the letter again. I thought Dad wanted the house to stay in the family. He wanted me safe. He wanted both. Maybe. But when those 2 things conflicted, he chose me. That sentence landed hard. Ethan stood and walked toward the window. For several seconds he said nothing. Then he spoke quietly. I wasn't waiting for you to die. I hope not. After Mom didn't mean that. My heart stopped. He turned. I hadn't mentioned the property assessment. Not during this conversation. Not once. He realized his mistake immediately. I looked at him. So you do know about the paper? Rachel's head snapped toward him. What paper? Ethan rubbed his forehead. Mom, you put a property assessment in my files. He didn't answer. You calculated the equity. I was trying to understand what the house was worth. Why? Because I thought someday it would matter. To whom? To all of us. I stared at him. What did after Mom mean? His eyes dropped. After you moved. Is that the truth? Yes. I wanted to believe him. Perhaps part of it was true. But whether he meant after I moved or after I died no longer changed the central problem. He had assigned himself the next chapter of something that was still mine. Rachel looked shaken. You never told me you went through Nicole's files. It wasn't like that. How was it I found the assessment and made notes? In her property folder, he didn't answer. Rachel leaned back. For the first time I saw something other than entitlement in her expression. Embarrassment. Maybe even fear. Not fear of losing the house. Fear of realizing how far they'd allowed themselves to go. Ethan sat again. His anger was gone. I thought the house was our safety net. I nodded. I know. He looked up. And now it's gone. No. What the house isn't your lost safety net, Ethan. I placed my hand on the envelope. It was never your safety net. His eyes filled, though he blinked quickly. I had seen my son angry, defensive, embarrassed. I had rarely seen him ashamed. I screwed this up, he said. It was barely above a whisper. Rachel looked at him. He continued. I started thinking ahead. Then I started thinking like it was guaranteed. I didn't rescue him from the admission. Thomas wouldn't have. So I let the silence remain. Finally, Ethan asked, "What happens now you find a place to live?" He nodded slowly. "And us?" That question hurt more. I looked at him. "I don't know yet." His eyes met mine. "I don't want to lose you over a house." "Then don't." He looked confused. "The house isn't what caused this." I touched Thomas's letter. "This did. What, thinking my life was something you could plan around instead of something I was still living." Ethan looked down. For the first time since this began, he didn't argue. And I realized that was the real twist Thomas had left behind. Not a secret fortune, not a hidden deed, not some legal trick that defeated Ethan, just a boundary written years before any of us knew how badly I would need it. The house had never been preserved for my son. It had been preserved for me. And now I finally understood why. The morning after I read Thomas's letter, nobody mentioned the house over breakfast. That silence felt different from the ones we'd had before. There was no hidden strategy in it, no careful avoidance, just exhaustion. Maya ate cereal at the kitchen island, while Ethan drank coffee beside the sink. Rachel scrolled through rental listings on her phone. I watched them and realized something uncomfortable. For almost 2 years, this arrangement had protected them from reality. Now reality had arrived with a closing date. I wasn't going to throw them onto the street. I had made that clear to Linda and Karen from the beginning. The buyers had agreed to possession terms that gave us enough time to move responsibly. From the day everything became unavoidable, Ethan and Rachel had roughly 30 days to find somewhere else. 30 days. Ethan hated that number. "I can't find a decent house in 30 days, he said that afternoon. "You can find somewhere to live. That's not the same thing." "No." I folded a dish towel. "It isn't." He looked at me, perhaps expecting more sympathy. I didn't offer any. Not because I enjoyed watching him struggle. Because I finally understood that rescuing him from every difficult consequence had helped create the man standing in front of me. Rachel approached the problem differently. She became practical. Within 3 days, she had spreadsheets, rent ranges, school districts, commute times, deposits, moving estimates. For the first time, I watched her organize her own household instead of mine. The numbers were apparently sobering. One evening, I heard them arguing upstairs. "We can't afford that," Ethan said. "We can't afford anything you think is acceptable," Rachel replied. "I don't want Maya changing schools. Then we pay more." "With what?" There was a long silence. Then Rachel said something I wasn't supposed to hear. "We should have saved more while we were here." I stopped in the hallway. Ethan answered quietly. "I know." That was all. No excuse. No accusation. Just I know. I continued downstairs. A few days later, Ethan asked if I could look at a rental listing. That surprised me. He placed his laptop on the kitchen table. 3 bedrooms, about 12 minutes from here. The house was smaller than mine. 1 bathroom needed updating. The backyard was modest. The rent was high but not unreasonable for the area. "What do you think?" he asked. I studied him. "What do you think?" He frowned. "I'm asking you." "I know. But you're the one who'll live there." He leaned back. "I don't know. You don't like it." "It's fine. Then what's wrong?" He looked at the screen. "It feels like going backward." There it was. Not homelessness, not danger, pride. Backward from what he looked around my kitchen. This. I followed his gaze. "You mean my house?" His jaw tightened. Then he nodded. "Yes." I appreciated the correction. Ethan, living in a smaller house you pay for isn't going backward. It feels like it. Maybe because you've been measuring progress by what you can access instead of what you've built. He looked at me. "That sounds like Dad." I'll take that as a compliment. A tiny smile appeared. The first genuine one between us in weeks. Then it disappeared. I really messed this up, didn't I? Yes. He looked surprised by how quickly I answered. I almost apologized. Almost. Instead, I said, but messing something up doesn't mean you can't fix what comes after. He nodded. That evening, he applied for the rental. They didn't get it. Another applicant had stronger financials. Ethan was furious. A year earlier, I would have started calling people. I would have offered a larger deposit. I would have asked how much money he needed. This time I said I'm sorry. And nothing else. It was one of the hardest things I had ever done. A week later, they found another place. 3 bedrooms. A little farther from Maya's school, but still within the district. No granite kitchen. No oversized primary suite. No mature dogwood tree in the backyard. But it was clean. Safe. Affordable if Ethan and Rachel adjusted their spending. Rachel showed me photographs. This is probably the one. It looks nice. She gave me a tired smile. Not as nice as here. No. She looked around. I got too comfortable. The admission surprised me. I waited. Rachel touched the edge of the kitchen counter. When we moved in, I really did think it was temporary. I believe you. Then somewhere along the way I started thinking of the house like it was ours. I know, I shouldn't have. No. She nodded. There were tears in her eyes. I was wrong about the senior living places. I didn't rush to tell her everything was fine. It wasn't your place to choose. I know that now. That was enough. Maya had the hardest time. Not because she cared about the house. Because she thought the family breaking apart was somehow connected to her. One evening, I found her sitting on the back steps. She had her knees pulled against her chest. I sat beside her. You okay? She shrugged. That's teenager language for no. She smiled weakly. After a minute, she said, I'm sorry. For what everything? I turned toward her. What did you do? Nothing. Exactly. She picked at the cuff of her sweatshirt. If I hadn't told you what Dad said about the retirement plan, stop. She looked at me. You did not cause this. But after I told you Maya, I took her hand. Your parents made choices. I made choices. You are not responsible for any of them. Her eyes filled. Are you mad at Dad? Yes. She seemed surprised. I smiled gently. You're allowed to love someone and still be angry with them. Are you going to forgive him? I hope so. When I don't know. She leaned against my shoulder. Can I really stay at your new place as often as your parents allow? You promise I already picked where your bed is going. That made her laugh. 2 weeks before closing, boxes began appearing everywhere. Mine were labeled townhouse. Theirs were labeled rental. Thomas's leather chair went with me. So did our anniversary photograph. So did the blue casserole dish Rachel had once tried to donate. Some things I gave away willingly. That felt different. Choice changes everything. 5 days before the movers arrived, Ethan knocked on my bedroom door. Can I come in? Yes. He stepped inside. No folder, no brochure, no financial paperwork. Just Ethan. He sat in the chair near the window. I signed the lease today. Good. We move next Friday. I know. He rubbed his hands together. Then he said, Rachel and Maya think I'm here helping pack. Aren't you? No. I waited. He looked toward the photograph of Thomas. I wanted to talk to you without everybody around. Okay. For several seconds he struggled. Then he said, I don't think I realized when I crossed the line. I said nothing. At first I really did think we were staying temporarily. I believe that. Then being here made everything easier. He looked embarrassed. No rent, good neighborhood. Maya was happy. Rachel had room to work. I started thinking about what life would look like if we stayed, and I became the problem. His eyes met mine. Yes, the honesty hurt, but I preferred it to another excuse. I started seeing you like you were standing between me and something I was supposed to have. I swallowed. Your father tried to warn me about that. I know. His voice cracked slightly. I hate that he saw it in me. Then change it. He looked down. I don't know if you can forgive me. I can. His head lifted. But forgiveness isn't the same as going back. He nodded slowly. I understand. I won't manage your finances. I know. I won't be your backup housing plan. I know. And I won't organize my future around making yours easier. He looked at me for a long moment. Okay. I felt tears gathering. I still love you. His eyes reddened. I love you too, Mom. He stood. For a second, neither of us knew what to do. Then he hugged me. Not the quick kiss on the forehead gesture he'd used whenever he wanted to smooth something over. A real hug. I held my son and let myself remember all the versions of him I'd loved. The little boy, the teenager, the young father, the man who had disappointed me. They were all Ethan. When he pulled away, he wiped his eyes and gave an embarrassed laugh. Dad would tell me I deserved this. No. I shook my head. He'd tell you to learn from it. Ethan nodded. Then he picked up an empty box. So what do you want packed? I pointed toward a shelf. Books. He started filling the box. And for the first time in months, we spent an hour together without talking about ownership, inheritance, senior living, or money. Just books, memories, Thomas, life. The house was still being sold. Ethan was still moving. Nothing had been undone. But something had begun to change. Not because I saved my son from the consequences. Because finally I didn't. Maybe a healthier one. I had spent most of my life believing a good mother gave until nobody needed anything from her. At 16,